Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 162. I am your host NBZ and I'm joined as per always, as per usual, by Bally. Hi Bally, how you doing?
Hello MBZ, I'm doing good. A little concerned about our podcast feed, but I'm sure you can
definitely
explain.
not. No panicking here whatsoever. So just to bring people up to date, because there may have been people who listened to this podcast and who wanted to listen to the most recent few episodes and looked at their feed and were like, why has everything disappeared? Why is the Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order spoiler cast the first thing in the feed? What is going on? There used to be 187 episodes, now there are only 80. We're going through a thing right now where we are switching hosts for our podcast feed, which means that something has gone wrong, of course, because such is life and Murphy's Law. So unfortunately, our episodes, for whatever reason, have gone missing. They should be coming back. We are working with the new host that we're moving our podcast to get everything resolved. It's taking time, longer than I want it to, but hopefully it should be okay in the end, and we can all move on with our lives. But that's it's a little bit of an update for people, if you don't know what's going on. If in the meantime you want to listen to previous episodes that are not showing up in the feed, you can go to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/thisnintendolife, which has a handy playlist where every single episode since the beginning is listed in order. So you can go and find whatever you want and listen to it through there. Not the most ideal thing, I know. Sorry. Hopefully it will all be sorted soon and we won't have to worry about it anymore. So yes, hey, we're here though. We're with another episode, and hopefully everyone's able to hear this. I'm saying all this preamble with the idea that everyone's actually going to get this episode on the day and
they've told us it should be fine.
Yes, they said it should be working. So
if everyone
we'll see.
goes by their word, we're all good.
Yes. The other thing I want to bring up, because it should have been posted by this point, but I have actually recorded another bonus episode, which is a Fire Emblem Three Houses spoiler cast with Devon from Emblemcast, and that will hopefully go up next week, in kind of the interim between episodes. It was supposed to go up last week, but then this shit happened in between, and I was like, well, I don't want to mess with anything until we know what's going on. We've got Fire Emblem DLC coming up, so I think that's a good time to put that episode out. So hopefully you guys look forward to that next time. But for now, we're going to talk about what we're doing this week, this episode, Bally. So will you tell the fine folks what the plan is for the show?
So we're going to do a 2-segment show this week. First segment is going to be all the games that we have been playing. And then for our second segment, we're going to do a little sort of review of the Nintendo Switch. Give it a grade. Go through kind of what we think about the hardware, the software, first party, third party. And just kind of a state of play as to where... A state of play, good, that was a good phrase. A state of play as to where we are with the system.
Yes, a report card, you could call it.
That's the word I was looking for.
Yes,
card.
that we stole from our offenders, because all good ideas, we steal them. Look forward to that. It's a long segment in the second half, so we'll get back to your emails next time, hopefully we'll be doing, well, I'll talk about this at the end of the show as well, but we'll do some 3DS retrospective stuff, so you can send emails to that. Let's get into it then, Bally. We're talking about video games we've been playing, and I think like the first major release of the year is here in terms of a thing that has come out that lots of people are talking about, that is probably going to be in contention for a lot of people's best of at the end of 2020, and that is Kentucky Route Zero, a game that has been around for a fucking long time. I remember listening to people talk about it back in 2013 when Act 1 came out and thinking, oh, it's an episodic game. And like around that time, you had The Walking Dead from Telltale. You were starting to see other companies lean into this episodic model of like, you know, taking maybe a year to put out a game, but doing it in every 2 months there'd be a new episode out. And so Kentucky Route Zero comes out, and I was like, oh, it's another one of those. Like, it seems like it'll come out pretty frequently. And then it turns out, no, it's going to take 7 years for this game to be finished. So I was in a holding pattern for a long time, because I was like, oh, yeah, it sounds really cool and interesting, and people are talking about it. Am I going to want to play it right now? No, I'm just going to wait until it's all done and kind of get to it when I get to it. And didn't realize that it would take this period of time for it to come out. And it's interesting because I think had I played it when it came out, I don't think my critical tool set or my ideologies or anything would have been well equipped to understand a lot of what this game is saying or what it is trying to do. I don't think many people would have been able to at that time do the same, right? Because I feel like the way that people talk about art and games and just general, politics has come such a long way in the last 7 years.
Absolutely, yeah.
That it's very interesting to go back to this game now and play through those first few acts and realize that they were quite ahead of their time in terms of what they were doing with this game.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of the game started in the post 2011. Well, think about like the 2008 financial crash. It was sort of in the few years following that. So I guess a lot of the themes are definitely more rooted in that. But those themes, I would argue, certainly at least in the UK, have only gotten worse since 2010, not better. And I guess the story is slightly different in the United States, where this game is vaguely set. But yeah, you definitely feel those themes.
For sure. And so to explain what Kentucky Route Zero is, so basically the game just came out on all the consoles. There's a TV edition, which is what it's called, on Switch and on PS4 and stuff. And so, Bally, you played the Switch version.
I did, yes.
I had a free copy of it on Twitch Prime on PC from 2017. So when I got it, I was like, oh, cool, I have access to this game now. I'll wait until they finish it and then I'll play it. And I think that's the decision a lot of people had made is, look, it's going to come out and then it's not super long to just go through the whole thing. And we have both finished the game. So we both finished it this morning, actually. And yeah, I don't really know how to talk about this game.
I don't know either, but we're going to give it a bash.
Sure, it is one of the most uniquely weird and literary games I've ever played. I tweeted this out, but playing this felt like studying a modernist or postmodernist text for an English class that I was going to take. In the sense that there is so much density to it, there are so many themes being explored, and there is so much drawn from that style of storytelling, right? Because
it's very much modern art, isn't it? Absolutely.
Yeah. At its core, it is not really a straightforward plot or narrative. Like, there is a story, there are characters, but so much of the landscape is dictated by the surrealist imagery and this melding of the mundane and the magical. And it is, for me, I find that stuff very hard to approach from a level of engaging with it. Like, when I was studying a lot of these books in English, I didn't necessarily say I enjoyed the reading of them or enjoyed the experience of the story, because a lot of the times that's not really the point. But I was often fascinated by what they were trying to say and what they were trying to get across. And I felt so similarly about Kentucky Route Zero in that it constantly throws you into weird scenarios and situations. The dialogue is jumping from place to place, and it never really... It's saying so much while also just leaving so much open to your approach to it.
I've not sort of read some of the literature you're talking about, but I sort of felt like I was in a modern art gallery for a lot of the time. It's those same feelings. Like, you're looking at this art, and it's not so much do you get it or don't you get it. It's almost like a sliding scale of you understand some aspects and you can appreciate them, and then there's other aspects that just leave you completely confused, baffled. And then likewise, there's other pieces of art that I personally feel like I can barely engage with at all, because it's whatever tidbit I'm meant to latch onto this piece with, I'm not buying. So and this game even has one scene where you are walking around what is essentially like a modern art gallery, and I was like, very fitting. That's exactly how I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, exactly.
With this game.
That's true.
And we've obviously said on the show before how much I'm a big fan of sort of more overt storytelling. And
yes, and this is so not that at all.
This is so much the opposite, that it was kind of quite refreshing in a way to try and just kind of work out, what does this represent? What's my interpretation of this? And I was definitely had this urge to check out what other people were saying about their interpretations when I beat the game. And yeah, there's a lot in there. And I think Waypoint Radio used this phrase, but they described it as magical realism. So it's taking like real world locations, concepts, and then kind of shuffling them in this magical way where you have a reality and a root zero, and it's all very strange.
Yeah, no, magical realism is a thing that's been around for a long time, and it is, again, like some of the stuff that I read for English stuff had a lot of that same feel to it. Like postmodern novels like The Third Policeman by Flannery O'Brien was one of those that I really enjoyed, but also was very baffled by. There's Infinite Jest, which is a very well-known piece of literature that I just didn't even try to engage with because it's like 1,000 pages long and it's just full of a bunch of nonsense that just for me was way too intimidating. And I feel like Kentucky Route Zero is not as intimidating as some of that stuff that I have engaged with previously, but it's certainly...
It's not easy.
It can be jarring, and it can throw you into scenarios often with zero context and zero idea of what's going on, with characters you've not had any clue of who they are before they just enter the scene. But I do appreciate a lot of what it is trying to do in terms of it is a heavy capitalist critique, but not in the sense of focusing on the power structures that create terrible situations, but more the lives lived by the people who are affected by late capitalism, right? And to me that was an interesting approach because it does allow you to kind of live these people's lives and not luxuriate, but really languor in it, right? It's a slow game, it's a plodding game. It is so dialogue focused and so rich with, like, there was often times where I'd just sit there and read through a thing and be like, okay, I need to read it again. Like, I just need to go through this a couple of times to really understand what's going on. And it has an enchanting quality to it, right? I think this is probably the best example of that squaring of the magical realism of just the nonsense and the craziness versus the mundanity of it is in Act 3, where you go to the bar and Junebug and Johnny get up on stage and they do this performance, this song. And it's a song that as soon as it starts, like as soon as the art happens, right, you transition from this mundane, like you can hear the hum of the lights in the bar. Some of the sound design in this game is incredible in its minimalism.
The ceiling of the bar opens up to like the stars as well.
Yes,
like, it's very visually impressive.
Right, it's sonically impressive, it's visually impressive, and literarily as well, because you are choosing the lines of the song as they are being sung. Like you are an author in conjunction with this entire thing that is happening. And it is, the game is split up into acts. It is a play essentially, and you less play as characters and you more so direct where things are going by choosing dialogue options for all the characters. And
that's hit home in that transition between, I think it is Act 3 and 4, where you actually are an actor on a stage.
Yes.
And then you're in that play, stuff happens, but then the characters the two artists or songwriters, singers you're anticipating are Johnny and Junebug, I believe it is. And then they actually become characters later in Act, I think it's between 2 and 3, and it's in Act 3, right. You see them and then you're like, okay, right, wow. So this whole thing is a play potentially. It's like implying that.
Sure. I mean, it's, everything is open to whatever kind of view of it you have, but it does place itself structurally as so, right? But that moment when it transitions to this song that's happening and you see the skies above and everything, and like the colors and everything kind of swells, there is this like transcendent majesty to that moment, and then like it ends and you come back to it and you just hear that humming of the lights in the dive bar, and it's this kind of rooting it back in mundanity and reality versus... And I think that is what the game is. And the game, like near its conclusion, kind of has this approach to the importance of art versus, the things that constrain that art. And I think that just that moment is extremely good at conveying those ideas, essentially.
Shall we go into some of the details of like what were your interpretations of certain things in this game? So one I'm really curious is your view on are like Conway is injury to his leg,
right?
the yellow skeleton people that you see throughout the game at different points. One of them is them actually coming into that bar that we were just talking about when the barman is anticipating Junebug and Johnny
in the interlude. The
interlude, and then these yellow skeletons come. My take on them is that they're just kind of like they're almost like the system. They're like the.
I mean, they're those who have been killed by the system, right? They're those who have been consumed by it. That it is this idea of labor and bodies and things being taken away from you, right? Like his leg being injured and the constant, like, you're constantly having conversations between Shannon and Conway about, like, oh, we should get that looked at. We should go to this doctor.
And he's always like, around for about an hour in game time.
Right.
And it is that really slow, man, his leg is really screwed. Like, we need to get it
But
sorted.
this is a truly specifically American problem, right?
Right.
In terms of medical care and having to pay for treatment and not having something like the NHS, which allows you to not worry about, going into debt for the reasons of, oh no, I got into an accident, now I suddenly have to pay a bunch of money for it. Mm-hmm. It's kind of preying on that idea and the idea that you kind of leave it alone because you don't have the means by which to fix it, right?
As much as he is becoming like one of those yellow skeletons, and then I guess he kind of, in one interpretation, I guess you could argue, becomes that way eventually, but and you see that like his arm changes at a very random moment, and I never noticed, and then I saw it as like, oh my god, his arm has gone that way as well. But it's the way that not only are those who were in debt become like that, but they also seem to also be the debt collectors in a way. Like they seem to be the people who turn up to say, right, you're coming into the, not necessarily afterlife, but you're coming into like this,
sure,
whatever in between that they've concocted, that where you are the skeleton. And then the scene where and they jump back to this where Ezra, and I can't remember the name of the character with Ezra, but Shannon and Conway split off from them and they go, we're going to check out over here. And then later in the game, I think it's Conway explains to Ezra what they were doing, and they went to this church, and then they're in one of the pews, and then this lift sucks them down into what's like some sort of factory that's run by these skeletal electric kind of people. And then they're just sort of like explaining to them about like the systems going on down here and the debt and this, that, and the other. And then when they get back to Ezra, they don't say anything. So it is confusing as to like, I can't remember my original thread. What I was going to ask was, what was your interpretation of like these people?
I mean, to me, it's the theme of the system basically dehumanizing and taking away any sort of agency, right? That you have, while also being like, well, hey, this is better than what was happening to you before, right? Because it's offered to him that he could potentially get medical care through this place that he's going to now work for, or that he can, have it's like he has the opportunity to pay his debts by being in this place, right? I think it is just trying to get across that idea that under this in this like reality where this corporation has come along and bought up this whole town and then has abandoned it, that idea of capitalism just murdering, taking things over and then just leaving them in its wake. And I think a lot of those people are just like those who have been subsumed into a system, those who have no choice any longer and are kind of don't really have agency anymore. And it's it's very hard to pin down because there is so much weirdness going on and none of it is overtly explained, and that's really not what the point of it is. It's just to kind of leave you with ideas and so here's the thing that like anecdotally was very interesting to me. There's a moment in Act 4 where you're going through this tunnel and there's this phone line kind of thing going on, and there's this one worker who's working there, and she's telling you about how there used to be 12 people who worked here and I was employee number 12 or whatever, and over time everyone got laid off, everyone got taken away, and she was ending up like being the last person there, training a machine that was inevitably going to take her job from her but then kind of coming to this realization that actually maybe that's not what she's doing. She's actually just there
maybe
because it's cheaper.
The machine.
She is the machine because it's cheaper for the company to just leave her there doing the work of 13 other people at once. This overwork, the idea of labor and capitalism not giving workers the tools which to thrive and overworking them as well. And then, so I finished that act. I went to Tesco. So I walked to Tesco.
Oh, here we go.
And like just to buy whatever. And I'm standing in line to do the self-service checkout. And inextricably, the self-service checkout, you know, I don't know if this is a big thing in America or not. I didn't really see it when we were over there. It tended to be lots of just going over to places where people were actually doing the work.
Yeah, I agree. I've not seen it as much in the States yet.
But it's very, very common here now, especially in supermarkets. And the self-service was just fucked up. It was like all 6 of the stations were flashing red, and there's this one Indian woman who's just panicking, and like she's going around trying to help people, trying to like stop everything from going wrong, make it so that people are angry, people are annoyed by it. And I'm like, this is the truest thing.
The system is just not working.
It is such a, it's like you look at it in its representation in a piece of art like Kentucky Route Zero, and you're like, okay, yes, like I see what they're getting at. But there is such a truism to it. Like, and seeing that firsthand.
It's like trying to be more efficient. Here are the machines, and we have this one person there, and she can be responsible if anything goes wrong. And
exactly.
That simple formula just, in this moment you're talking about, just wasn't working.
No, and it's because, you know, the place we are at right now in society is that the rich get richer by exploiting those underneath them, in terms of, well, we could make even more money if we didn't pay any more people. So how about first we're switching to machines? We still need someone there to kind of figure it out in case something goes wrong. So let's like underpay this person, put them there to figure it out, and, you know, they can deal with it, right? That just really struck me, having literally just played Act 4 and then that happening straight away. It was this very illuminating thing.
Yeah. So one thing that hit me really hard, I'm interested if you noticed this, was when you are introduced to Junebug and Johnny, and they come in on it's like a motorbike with a sidecar.
Yes, yeah.
And they're all about performing and culture, and they almost seem like this breath of fresh air, that they are the counter to this hardship of the capitalist system. The culture is almost
they
are
literally robots who have decided to self-style themselves and identify themselves and give themselves flavor and personality and flair and color. Right.
It took me so long to realize that they were robots.
Yeah, it's very subtle, because every time they walk, you just hear
and I'm like, what is that?
Internal...
And then I realized, okay, the 2 freshest, most pro sort of culture artists, I guess, in the whole game are robots. And it's just like, what is this? Like that really shocked me, that the kind of the most open, outward looking people were actually robots. And it did it hit me in a moment in maybe end of Act 3, middle of Act 4 or so. And I kept hearing that noise, that's their joints moving, and I just assumed it was like the mammoth boat, or I assumed it was some other moving cog or whirring thing that was happening on screen. And then all of a sudden I realized actually it's coming from them, and that's when I was they're robots. And it is shocking that the most positive kind of 2 people in the game turn out to not even be real. But, no,
I mean, but like, what is real? What is human, right? And that is, you know, the idea of androids. And like, I think a lot of people have criticized David Cage's approach to that type of storytelling, being like, well, what if the androids were really people? And it's like, okay, David Cage, we've done this before, right? And I think like that's the smartness of Kentucky Route Zero, is it doesn't even linger on that. Like it knows that, or it assumes that you're smart enough to take that context and understand it within the larger whole. And I think that's one of the things with approachability to this game, is I do think you need a certain, not that you won't enjoy it if you aren't someone who likes to think about these types of things and ideas, but
you'll know pretty quickly if you're going to get something out of it, to be honest. Like the game evolves and changes, but I don't think the pacing really feels like it changes. Like if you enjoy Act 1, you'll enjoy the rest. And I'm not even sure if I enjoyed this game in like a traditional sense, but I did...
Exactly. It kind of defies enjoyment, right? And to me, that's important because I don't think all games must be enjoyable. All games must be fun. There are some, and similar to, film or television or literature. We are in a world where there are pieces of art that exist that are not there for entertainment necessarily, but they're there to say something. I think it's important that games have made this step to that point as well.
And so there were like points in this game where the area I was in, what they were trying to convey to me, I just wasn't understanding in the slightest. So maybe there was only maybe one or two or maybe three in total in the game where I was completely unaware of what this area meant and how it linked to anything, if it even did. And the one I mean is it like the Xanadu, the Faxanadu machine?
Yes,
is that
right.
the right word? That lasted for maybe 20 minutes, half an hour, and I swear to God, it all just completely went over my head. Like, I completely didn't understand that. I don't know if you got much more out of that section.
The weirdness of it is that it blends reality and the past in a way, because there's a point at which you're doing all this stuff and it leads to the present, right? Where, like, the real Lula Chamberlain, who's like this person who you initially meet on the Zero as like a clerk working in a bureau, who also in one of the interludes is talked about as this famous artist who then just appears in the cave area, and is the person who's like, we need to get, where is the address for this place that we're delivering this last package to. So there is I will say, for me, the place where the game is at its most just who knows what's going on is that cave section. The entire cave section is just full of weird characters. And...
Sorry, which cave? Where you're on the boat going into the tunnel cave, or the cave?
No, the cave with the burning computers in the middle.
Right, okay.
All that stuff.
Cool. I agree.
It's definitely it's a thing, and it's one of those things where to some degree I appreciate the people who played this game as it came out, because they had the time to breathe in which to analyze and take it in. And
I would have struggled massively having played this over that length of time. I was struggling as it was, playing it in the space of 6 to 8 hours or whatever it was.
Yes, and I don't think it's one of those games where I think you should play an act at a time. I did play Acts 3 and 4 in the same day. I took a break between them. But it definitely you'll benefit if you are able to stir on it and just kind of sit and...
One of my criticisms would be that just how dense with text aspects of the game are. And what I mean, I'm not saying being dense with text is a bad thing. I mean, there are parts of text that just feel so not linked to anything, and like so isolated that don't link to anything else going on, that I found it difficult sometimes to concentrate on what bits of text, what things I'm doing or not doing are more important than others. And
sure, I mean, like, there are moments where they deliberately do that, right? There's a moment where you have two different characters with two different boxes alongside each other, simultaneously.
I hated that.
Who are both having a conversation with each other while also having their own internal monologue, right?
Yeah.
And the blending of internal monologue with the external that's going on, like the internal and external, it's a really smartly done thing, but it is very hard to follow at times.
Because like with the whole thing that this is like one big play and you are essentially the director rather than the character, and any line you say does become reality, whether it's future, past or present.
Totally,
that takes a while to get used to, because in the start I'm like, right, I'm Conway, I say this, I do that, and like any other like point and click game, and like an Oxenfree or whatever, and it very much isn't like that. And the faster you appreciate that you look at it from the space of being like a director, and these are all your sort of puppets, I guess, or your characters, and that there's lots of them and that they do link in certain ways. That I think if I'd known that earlier, I probably would have got more out of it from an earlier situation, where I found this game kind of grew on me a bit more in the later acts, and the game like visually does become more interesting.
I do think the later acts are much bolder and yeah, of course, more visually interesting. And like Act 4 in particular, one of the things that's very striking about it is its ability to be incredibly artistic in a very minimalist way that's kind of unlike anything I've seen before in terms of like the zero itself, the like rotating wireframeness of it, and then especially in Act 4, the boat and the river, like the way in which that is created,
and it's just being depicted by white lines on a black background.
Yeah, literally white lines on a black background.
It's really
and
impressive.
It is incredibly artistic still. So that stuff was very impressive to me. It does get more impressive as it goes on, but like Act 4 in itself is pretty much just vignette to vignette. It's just like this series of places that you stop off on a journey, and each one are disconnected from one another, and they're all kind of doing different things gameplay wise. It's all just this.
But then areas in the zero, and there's one area where you do like take this boat and you see all these floating helmets. And then I think Shannon, she's like, this is a memorial to like the miners lost in the original mine where you meet Shannon in Act 1. And it's wow. And then she says like, and I really hope the company doesn't come and take these helmets away. It's like, and then she emphasizes like, they had to pay for those helmets. Like those are their helmets then.
Yep.
And it's just the company trying to squeeze every last bit back out of these people who have obviously died through mining incidents or whatever. And it's just, that's one of the more overt things perhaps in this game. And those are obviously the ones that I find the easiest to remember and, and talk about in many aspects. But yeah, I'm only a few hours away from having beat this game, but just in my mind in this conversation, I am feeling more and more fond of it just as a result. Because in the moment, there were points, as I said, where it is just very like text heavy, and I made the text as large as possible. So in some ways, often. Oh,
interesting. Yeah. So were you playing this on handheld and Switch, and how does it control on that versus? I guess you didn't have any. Like on PC, it's very easy because it's clicking, and one of the really nice like visual touches they do is there's this kind of nail in the ground with a horseshoe that like flings around it when you click on the screen to where you're supposed to go. Versus, I think it's more like direct control on the Switch, like moving characters around.
Right. Yeah, there were like arrows that you essentially point at, and that'll take you to that area of the area vignette, I guess they are. Yeah, sorry, what your original question was like on Switch? Yeah, I played like 90%, I'd say, handheld, just because Caroline's playing Horizon Zero Dawn at the moment, and she's using Telly a lot. But and it runs really well. But yeah, that text, because I started the game and the text is obviously tiny, and it's not been designed for Switch, so it's totally understandable.
No, I mean it worked for me on PC, right? But, I'm very close to a big screen as opposed to you. So
I was blowing up the text massively. Now in the other areas, like it really did feel like it had been optimized perfectly because it was almost like a little scene, like a bar or a cafe or some other area you're in, and it would take up like just the lower third of the screen, and then the top 2/3 were like the text, and it was like it had been done perfectly in order. And then there were other parts where the text just took up the whole screen, and it was kind of like a bit strange, but it worked. And I am quite a slow, methodical reader, and when I'm reading something that I feel isn't linking, and then my mind will start wandering, and then you think, get back on track. And it's not easy, especially with a game that is so diverse in like what it's saying, and it's not this just this one linear story that you're building on. It's very much it is a linear story, but there are just so many, I guess, branches to what that story is telling that the linear story itself is almost irrelevant to a degree.
And to me it is essentially just a long poem, right? Like it is
that you are able to write because you constantly have a choice of like.
Right, exactly. That is, it's this co-ownership between you and the developers. You are part of like the construction of it, and it's poetic in a lot of ways. Like one of the first things you do is to open up a computer, you type in a 3-line poem essentially, and it's interesting because through the game you talk to the dog all the time, and I started to be like, oh, every time you talk to the dog, you ask it or you talk to it in 3 lines at a time, and those to me started to flow like poems of their own, right? And there's this reflection of poetry, this way in which it kind of shifts mood and tone, and is ethereal and doesn't necessarily have these direct connections, but is always shifting and never kind of constant. And that is what the entire game is. It is this like revolving door of ideas and moments, like lightly interconnected, but also very closely linked. It's just it's indiscernible in so many ways, and yet very clear in its ideas and clarity and its message. And especially by the end, like I think it ends in a way that I think you to some degree can author the tone of the ending, but I think for the most part the setting, the way that it wraps up is like it has a hopeful kind of conclusion, and I think that is definitely not necessarily what you might have expected from it, but I think it does it very well.
Yeah, Act 5 is it's not what I was expecting, but I agree it is more hopeful. And should we talk about some of the specifics of Act 5?
No, I think people are still playing through this. It's just come out, and I think we've touched on enough things to where people have a good idea. So yeah, I really have. I think it's one of those games that I will stew on for a long time, and will probably keep coming up in my mind, and like I'll keep revisiting moments from it and thinking about it, and I don't really know how to like place it. Like to me, it is very difficult when it comes to something like Game of the Year to even include this in a conversation, because in so many ways it's not really a game. Like I don't know. It's hard. Anyway. Yeah, anything else to say, Bally?
I'm glad I played it because it is very far out of my comfort zone, and I got a lot out of it. And it was kind of, if you compare it to something like Inside, where I wanted Inside to be something it turned out to not be. And I was never hoping that this game was going to be something it wasn't, and that kind of made
it was
the whole
kind of like
better.
obviously what it was from the outset.
It was more obvious, whereas Inside I don't think actually is very obvious about what it's going to be at the start. To be honest.
I think it is, but you know,
anyway,
we'll differ
opinions.
opinion.
No, this game sits better with me from like what it's trying to say perspective in that sense, as much as I think Inside is obviously like a very good puzzle platformer in a totally different action related kind of way.
Totally, yeah. Cool. Before we wrap this segment, I'll quickly talk about another game that I played, which is just totally in the different direction, which is Thumper. It's a game that got a lot of buzz when it came out, and is this weird rhythm game where you play as this beetle on this note highway. In some ways, it compares to Guitar Hero.
Yeah.
And it's just fast and violent and just like really difficult near the end as well.
When did it come out?
It was 2016, maybe 2017.
Okay.
It could have been 2017.
Did it make waves at the time?
Yeah, no, a lot of people liked it. I think Alex Navarro over at Giant Bomb gave it his game of the year. And obviously he very much likes rhythm games, is very much into music-driven things. And this game is that in a sense, but it's really also kind of like a runner in the sense that there are distinct levels that you go through and you have to finish. They'll always be the same, so you can learn them in a similar way to like a bit trip game essentially. But it is this forward momentum of like you're behind the back of this beetle who is like riding this highway, and the obstacles you come across come at you incredibly fast, and so you're often looking into the distance, right? Your eye is often trained on not the beetle itself, but what is coming up, so that you can react fast enough to it to get past it. Because if you're not, like, these things just happen in an instant, and it's really difficult for you to maintain your momentum if you get thrown off once. Basically, you get one free hit, and if that goes, then you die on your next hit. So basically you have one life per run as you go through. And that makes it very tricky. It makes it so that you need to have a great deal of precision. But not everything needs to be hit, right? There are some things where you can miss notes on the highway. You'll get a lower score for it, but you won't be destroyed by it, versus these banks, almost like these turns left and right, where you essentially scrape on the side of the track, and it turns you to the left or to the right. If you go into one of those and you're not holding the right direction, you'll smash into it and you'll take damage, or you'll die, essentially. So the game builds itself slowly. Like, it introduces these ideas over the course of the first, second, third areas. And it's interesting because I think the 6th or 5th world out of 9 total is where it really just hits its peak of difficulty, and then it kind of just maintains that peak the whole way through. It is just this real adrenaline rush of, you have to be so incredibly focused the whole time, because if you lapse in your concentration, you will just completely lose it and you'll just be thrown off. And there were definitely, especially boss fights, where the boss fights are interesting in that you need to hit every single note compared to the other levels where you can miss them.
And how long is a level? How long are you concentrating this intensely for?
It varies. Like, the one world can have like 30 levels in it, and those 30 levels, one of them could be 10 seconds long, one of them could be up to a minute in length. And like, a minute sounds short. Not in Thumper. Like, a minute long thing feels like a goddamn eternity because of the speed at which things are happening. So it kind of fluctuates and flows, and there will definitely be like, there'll be riffs or chords or like rhythms, and they're not overtly musical, but like, they will be beats, right? There'll be beats of like boom, 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 and you will see that phrase repeated throughout the levels, and it will kind of be muscle memory built into you. It's very clever in that way, in that it sets up these sequences that it will use in one level, and then like 3 levels later it will bring it back and it will build into the rhythm, and then it will mix it with another one that you've learned, and so it almost is this amalgam of pieces that you are putting together, and you somehow are able to get through them because of this muscle memory that has been built from the previous ones that you've gone through. And so by the end, like, each time I got up to a boss, it would be this slow process of like learning the first pattern, the second pattern, the third pattern, and you have to do all these 4 or 5 in a row without failing. And by the end, you're just like, you're like dream walking your way through the first one. Like, it's not even a problem versus the first time you do it. You're like, oh god, this, oh no, okay. But it's all about learning it and knowing what's coming, to then you can just be like flick, 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 and it just happens, right? It's this instant, muscle memory. And I really enjoyed it a lot. I think it definitely gets to a point where it's like, okay, it's like somewhat overwhelming, especially if you want to hit everything. There are particular parts of the highway which are like barriers that you knock into. So if you hold down the button, your beetle will like close its shell and go hard, essentially, which means that you can scrape by the turns, and you can also knock through the barriers. But then there are also barriers that are in the sky, and if you press A, and if you hold up and press A on a note, the beetle will lift and kind of float and like flap its wings, and it can knock into some of the higher up barriers, will give you extra points. And there was a point at which I was like, I can't do this. Like, I can't hit every note because the speed at which I need to switch between things is too much. So I basically was ignoring a lot of the high notes for most of the latter half of the game. And it's one of those things, I kind of wish that Guitar Hero drums did this, or Rock Band drums did this. My biggest problem with playing drums in those types of games is the foot pedal. Like, I cannot do the foot pedal while also doing everything else.
Yeah,
and
it's hard.
And those higher barriers to me felt like the foot pedal of Thumper. But at least in Thumper, I can just miss them and I don't get a penalty for it, right? Like, and I kind of wish there was a mode in Guitar Hero Rock Band where it's like, oh, just don't worry about the foot pedal, just focus on the drums. And maybe that's just a personal thing with me. I've not played drums. It's not something that I'm tuned into. It is like a rubbing your stomach and patting your head at the same time.
I think it's one of those things as well that if you say you did want to learn drums, it would be really difficult at first, but then it would just click. And then once it's clicked, then I think it's one of those things that just kind of works.
Yes, yeah, definitely. It's a thing that takes time to just practice and learn. And ultimately, I think I was just at a point where it's too much. So I appreciate the game allows you to skip that stuff. And there are definitely, like, it gets a little more complicated. They add a couple of lanes sometimes, and they will put things like really fast at you. And I found it very I relished the challenge of it, while also finding it at moments to be needlessly difficult. So it had its ups and downs. At the end, I was glad that I pushed through and did it and finished it. But I'd say it's definitely, I wouldn't call it a Marmite game, but I think it's one of those games that you'll kind of know how your mileage will vary depending on how you do in those first few levels or so.
Right, right.
But yeah, it's definitely worth playing. It's if you like rhythm games in the vein of a Guitar Hero, this is just that on crack. And like, as someone who plays Dragon Force Through the Fire and Flames on hard on Guitar Hero, and like that's kind of the peak of where I'm at, I found this a good challenge and definitely different in its own right. It's definitely unique and yeah, again, just something that I've not really played like before. It's just this mixing of ideas.
Yeah, I'd like to try it in VR. Definitely, I want to see what that's like. Because...
God, I would throw up so fast if this was in VR, because it is just non-stop speed going forward, and like if I'm sitting still and that's happening, I don't think I can handle it. I'm sure that you would have a field day.
It is on PSVR, right?
It is, yes. Yeah. So you can just buy the game and you can play it either out of VR or in VR. It's on Switch, and yeah, it's kind of a unique experience that is pretty cool. So
nice.
So yeah, Thumper, glad to have played that, and that is going to close us out for the first segment. Thank you for listening. We'll be back after the break with a big long one, talking about our impressions, our report card for the Switch for the last 3 years. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
Like smoke's arising, and it surely is a train. Surely is a train, boys. Surely is a train. Like smoke's arising, and it surely is a train. I'm on my long journey home. Lost all my money but a $2 bill. $2 bill, boys, $2 bill. Lost all my money but a $2 bill. I'm on my long journey home.
Alrighty, folks, welcome back to the last part of the show. It's time to take the Switch and discipline it, you know? It's had a good 3 years in school. It's time to give it a good telling off and tell it what it did good and what it did right, and give it a report card, because look, this podcast, we are shameless here. We steal ideas from every which way. So RFN did a report card for the Switch recently. So I was like, hey, Bally, why don't we do that as well and maybe make it into a whole segment thing?
We're a collage of podcast ideas put
we are,
together
look,
into one unified, fantastic podcast.
You know, people say Shovel Knight is Mega Man and Zelda and all these things, but Shovel Knight's its own thing, man. This Nintendo life is its own thing, even if it takes ideas from good things as well. So yeah. Basically, we're going to do a rundown of the Switch. It's almost 3 years old. We're getting close. It's a couple of months away. And we also had some hardware numbers and software numbers come out from Nintendo's recent financials, which gives us a good indication of like where we stand with Switch at the current moment in time, on the market, how it's doing overall, and I think it's just a good time to go over some of the things that have happened in the course of its lifespan and kind of grade them on a scale, and give our thoughts on them. So the kind of different areas we're going to be marking today are hardware, first-party software, third-party software, marketing or messaging, and their services, which is a bunch of different things.
I have an idea, and shoot me down if you just want to roll this into third-party. Do we want to have one more for indie?
That I'm rolling indie into third party.
Fair enough.
It's assumed. Yeah, basically. So we can talk about all that stuff together in one big bonanza. But I mean, the Switch numbers did come out. Maybe we'll start with that and talk about where the system is at currently. They basically came out and said that it's past 50 million, which means it is outsold the Super Nintendo. The Super Nintendo was 49 million units sold over its lifetime. So 3 years in, not even 3 years in yet, and we have surpassed what many believe is the best Nintendo console of all time. And interestingly enough, we're about 10 million away from the NES. So the Switch is now the third best-selling Nintendo console. And there's a big gap, obviously, because the Wii was such a raging success that it hit the 100 million mark like few consoles do. Although Sony seems to do a good job of that. Sony have passed 100 million with 3 out of 4 of their consoles. But Nintendo have only done it with one home console. They've obviously done a bunch with, Game Boy's past 100 million, so is DS. DS is the best. DS is the best-selling piece of video game hardware ever. It sold better than the PS2, which a lot of people don't seem to call into account, but it has. So that's very interesting. So yeah, it's third best-selling Nintendo home console of all time. If we talk handheld, then probably a little bit lower on the ladder. But how do you feel about these numbers, Bally? Because they came out and they're like, yeah, we sold 52 million. Also, here are all the software numbers for all these games. I think a few stand out to me. Pokemon Sword and Shield, 16 million in like just over a month.
Because these numbers are from December, right? So
yes,
it's sold even more as we speak than these numbers suggest.
Exactly. It was up to, I think, the 31st of December. So basically the full calendar year, which was, I guess it came out on the 15th of November, so it was a month and a half or so it had on the market. But it's this thing is fucking selling a lot of copies, and I think it really settles the question of like, well, the internet mob and people, they get angry and they're like boycotting things like, I'm not going to buy this because of Dexit, la la la. Turns out none of those people matter at all in any way.
It shows how vocal, like, of a minority they are, really. Where
yeah.
You might get the impression, that might be quite a lot of people who have that view, and in reality the numbers don't back it up.
Yeah, totally. And, there are legitimate criticisms of Sword and Shield. It's not a perfect game at all. There are definitely a bunch of issues it has, but I think that some of the shit was just overblown and stupid. So, hey, if you are sitting there and you're like, man, Game Freak, why don't you buck up your ideas? Why don't you move forward into the 21st century and make a modern video game? This proves they don't fucking have to, and they're not going to. So, I'm sorry, but if you have any expectations that Pokemon is going to pull a Breath of the Wild, it's not. At least not for the next decade, probably. Like, I just can't imagine them even bothering having posted numbers like this.
Yeah.
It's nonsensical for them to do so. Like, why would they? So, alas, that's how it goes. But, we've got our first game to pass the 20 million mark, which is Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, a port, a Wii U game that was very infamous. There was this Polygon article that went up that was like a pie chart of like Mario Karts that have sold on systems, and like they were predicting the Mario Kart 8 was going to be the worst selling Mario Kart of all time, and blah blah. It's very funny in retrospect now that Mario Kart 8 has sold this many fucking copies.
It's interesting with Mario Kart at the top, where, and obviously one of my predictions for this year was that we might get a new Mario Kart announced this year that comes out next year. And then you hear the point made that, but Mario Kart 8 is selling so well, why on earth would they want to get in the way of that potentially by having another Mario Kart? And I can see that angle, but I don't buy it in the sense that, like, look, we got Breath of the Wild 2 coming. Breath of the Wild is still selling pretty well. It's sitting on 16.3. We've just had Pokemon Sword and Shield come out, and we just had Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee that came out last year. I wouldn't argue that it's eating that tail. Like, I think there is room when Nintendo can say, you can have more than one, like we have Mario Kart Tour right now. I guess that's another aspect, but like you can have more than one Mario Kart and they can work off each other and both sell very well. I don't think it's necessarily an either or situation.
No, it's not an either or situation. I think it's just a lot of people probably from tradition of like one Mario Kart per system type deal. And it's a weird situation because it's an older game that's just been moved over.
Yeah, it's the first time Mario Kart's been remade, right? So it completely changes it.
Right, and the other thing we need to keep in mind is that each generation there were two Mario Karts because we had one handheld, one console, right? You had Mario Kart DS alongside Mario Kart Wii, and because that console is their handheld now, I mean, it doesn't mean they can't do it, but it's just a different scenario, right? So, and let's think about it, right? The last thing the Mario Kart team made was ARMS, and that was in 2017. It's been 3 years, practically. Coming up on April, it will have been 3 years since ARMS came out. You imagine the Mario Kart team have been working on something. Is it another new IP? Is it ARMS 2? I doubt it's ARMS 2. It's potentially them doing another Mario Kart style thing. So we'll see. But that's on the books, I think, to be announced this year at the very least, potentially. So. Yeah, I mean, overall, this top 5 is staggering. It's like Smash at 17 million, Odyssey and Breath of the Wild both at 16 million. Breath of the Wild sneaking up on Odyssey, because you'll remember when Odyssey came out, it blew past Breath of the Wild, and it was over it by a little bit of a margin, despite Breath of the Wild having a whole year to sell compared to Odyssey's 1 month on the market. But Breath of the Wild over time I feel like, the word of mouth on that game just is so good, and it's one of the games that people talk about the most with Switch. Odyssey, I think people do mention a lot, but Breath of the Wild is it's a GTA 5 situation. It's a Minecraft situation. It never leaves the conversation, essentially. And I think that's part of the reason why it continues to grow and get momentum behind it. And I think by this point it's the best-selling Zelda game of all time, like it must be. It's killing it, so... But yeah, what's
the game in the top 20 that you look at and you just sigh because it's sold so well and it's not up there with the quality of, Mario Kart, Smash Brothers, Super Mario Odyssey, Breath of the Wild?
Right.
There's one that sticks out for me, and that's New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe.
Yeah, New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe, sure. The big one is Super Mario Party. I mean, come on. Like, 9 million? It speaks to
Are you saying Mario Party is a bad franchise?
I'm saying that Mario Party can be good. I'm saying that I think that the market for Switch, like the types of people who play Switch, are the types of people who grew up playing N64 Mario Party, right? And so I think it was a genius move for them to put one out, for it to use the Joy-Cons and to do a bunch of nonsense. I think it looks pretty fun as far as Mario Parties go. It's just, I wish they'd let people play Mario Party online. Just maybe just give that as an option to people. That would be nice, but I don't know. It's people seem to have fun with it. I'm not saying it's a bad game, but it's one of those that leapt out to me as soon as I saw that. I was like, really? It's almost sold 10 million.
1-2 Switch is doing very well, or did very well. I don't think it's really selling anymore.
Well, no, I don't think it is doing very well. I think that it hit that cap of 3 million in 2017. I don't think it's sold beyond that since 2017, to be frank with you. It was basically like a launch game where it's like everyone bought it, and then after that, nothing, right? Like it's pretty much the only people who own 1-2 Switch are the people who bought it within that launch year.
Right,
I feel like it's just left the shelves or the digital marketplace anyway. So yeah, it's interesting overall, and I think that it's pretty cool that you have stuff like, Three Houses is getting there. Mario Tennis is done well for itself, and I think Luigi's Mansion 3. I think some people will be shocked by how well that game has done, but as I was telling you beforehand, Luigi's Mansion 2 killed it on 3DS. It's one of the best-selling 3DS games, and so I'm not surprised at all that Luigi's Mansion 3 has done really well. Like, it's the best-selling game outside of Pokemon from a first-party perspective last year. Outsold Mario Maker and Link's Awakening, and it came out later in the year than either of those games.
Yeah.
So,
and it's a much better game than the second game, and by that I mean I think it'll get, like that Breath of the Wild, it'll get good word of mouth, and like, have you tried this game, Luigi's Mansion 3? And then if people say, I didn't much like the second game, you're like, well, doesn't matter, this game's way better, And I think I'd be confident saying that to anyone who did have any issues with the second game, that this is a far improved game.
Totally. So yeah, I think that we're in a cool place for Nintendo right now. They're just firing on all cylinders, and things are going well. Video games are selling.
The general number of video games that are selling well when we're not even 3 years in is, I think, the most shocking part, where these numbers feel like the system's been around for 5, 6, 7 years, and it's obviously not. And it's that trajectory that I think, you think about the potential of what this could be, and if it could become like an 80 to 100 million system in the next 2 to 3 to 4 years, that's going to put like Nintendo in a much better place than I think they could have ever predicted, perhaps, with the launch of this thing.
Yeah, I think that they were a bit bullish about the second year, right? Second year, you'll remember they posted, we're going to sell 20 million units of Switch. And 2018 was not a good year for Switch, really. Like, there wasn't a big first-party banger outside of Smash Brothers at the end of the year. There was really no poster child. Like, it was very, very thin.
Well,
they were carried by indies and some cool third-party games, but they didn't have enough in 2018 for them to post those numbers. 2019, however, huge momentum. You know, you think about Black Friday deals with third year into this system's life, so many games, so many things that people can play that, you know, is outside of the traditional Nintendo ecosystem, and they have just blown past that number this year.
I mean, of the top 10, you've got 1, 2, 3 games from 2018, and then from 2017, you've got number 1, number 3, 4, 5 games out of the top 10, and then I think 2019 somewhere in the middle, you know, like, so as you say, like it was a kind of a slower year, as much as Smash Brothers Ultimate is like selling fantastically well.
Yeah, and it's a unique case, of course, and Smash Brothers continues to sell because the DLC continues to do marketing for them. It's a real big, it's a train. They ride that train, choo choo. Cool. So let's then move on to our report cards and talking about the various attributes of the Nintendo Switch over the past 3 years. Start with hardware. Hardware is an interesting one because for me, and I tweeted about this the other day, the Switch is the worst Nintendo hardware in years, but it's also the best Nintendo hardware in years.
Yeah,
it's such this weird, it's this weird situation where the base concept of Switch, the idea of it, the sleekness of the design, the feel of it as a quality product, right? Like 3DS, DS, all these handhelds in the past have felt durable and solid, and you can drop them and they survive, right? Like there's the Game Boy that survived the Gulf War. It's in the Nintendo New York store. You can go see it. But none of those really felt like high quality products in the same way that you would think about something like a Vita, right? Like Sony took the approach of more high-end tech product versus not to call them toys, but like versions of the DS and 3DS felt more kid-friendly, toy-like. Like the 2DS especially is a system that you look at and it's like it's a fucking door slab that you open a door with. The Switch is not that. It is so in the opposite direction. My initial viewing of the Switch in that reveal trailer they did in 2016 was, holy shit, it's sleek. Like I was so surprised by the tech productness of it. That said, as much as it's nice to use and fun and cool, it's just riddled with problems. Like the Joy-Con drift is a fucking nightmare. My second stick on my right Joy-Con has now started to do drifting as well, so that's fucking sucks. And Nintendo have done nothing about it. And I think this is the ultimate problem, is they hear people complaining about it. In North America, at least, they have been like, you can send it in for free repairs. They didn't do that in Europe. You can't get free repairs in Europe, so you just have to go out and buy a fucking new Joy-Con. And like they keep putting out these new colors and design. They just announced a fucking Animal Crossing Switch dock with new Joy-Cons that look pretty nice. Those are the ones I might probably buy after these because for fuck's sake, mine don't work anymore. But it's like, Nintendo, you need to fix the fundamental issues with the design of the Joy-Con, and they're just not doing it. Whether it's too much of an R&D cost, or whether they have plans in the future with a Switch Pro to just upgrade everything and then do it all at once, I don't know. But there's also the idea of like the Switch Lite now being in the ecosystem, and potentially the Switch Lite having the same problems. The only problem with the Switch Lite is you can't change. There's no Joy-Cons. Like, it's just a system. It's all built in. So for me, it's a huge black mark in a way that I haven't been disappointed with Nintendo hardware quality in forever, since the DS Lite and its hinge problems, really. It's the last time I had personal issues with how durable something was.
Yeah, and I think that when you talk about like hardware issues in the past, I know another big one was people throwing like their Wiimotes into screens and
or almost at Windows.
Almost at Windows, and that seems to have made more headlines because I think it's more dramatic. I think the Wii obviously sold faster at that point in time, roughly speaking, and like obviously everyone had Wii Sports. They were swinging their arms. Like, regardless of the scale of Joy-Con drift people are getting, I think we can agree it does take quite a lot of wear and tear to get to that point. It isn't instantaneous in the same way that, you can swing your arm and let go of a Wiimote by accident and through sweat or whatever you've been doing, and it just flies into your telly. So I think that it's a more subtle issue, and it really feels like Nintendo just doubled down and said, it's not a big deal to us, and it's not making. I honestly think the whole reason that the Wiimote condom things came out with the rubber protection was because of the headlines. It was because of the media bite on this thing, and there hasn't been that same media bite outside of, video game outlets.
Right.
And I think had that been the case, I think they might have felt a bit more pressure to do something. But as it stands, enough people are mugs like me who get the Joy-Con drift, just think, right, well, can I send this in? Apparently not. Well, I'll have to go without my Joy-Cons for however long. Oh, well, I could just buy some more Joy-Cons. And yes, they're expensive, but ultimately, it's a seamless transition to just play more Switch games. And I think Nintendo have just decided, you know what, people like me who are mugs will make up the majority of people who the issue annoys the most, I should say. So they are just generally, people who are buying a lot of games. If you buy a lot of games, that implies you got a lot of money to spend on video games. If you're spending a lot of money on video games, you're more inclined to upgrade your not upgrade, but get new Joy-Cons. So I think they're just
right. Not to even speak of the fact that if you're playing more video games, the hardware is being used more, and therefore it's more likely to find these faults happen because it's just through wear and tear, essentially.
Yeah, and the more you actually talk to people who have played Switch a lot. Initially, it felt like it was a third of people. Then it was 50%. Then it was 60%. Now it feels like it's about 80 to 90% of people who have if you've sunk 100 hours into, I was going to say Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, I reckon it's about an 80% chance you have experienced in some way Joy-Con drift. And that is just shocking. And as I said, I think, unfortunately, the market this time has spoken and said, you know what, the consumers aren't caring enough about that issue this time around, and the media aren't just getting on it like they were with the Wiimotes. And I think Nintendo unfortunately have won this round.
Yeah, and the other thing that you just brought up that I completely forgot about, you didn't bring it up but you reminded me of it, is when I was playing Breath of the Wild at launch, it wasn't Joy-Con drift, it was that issue where connectivity would fuck up if you held the Joy-Con away from you. Game Explain did that video where Andre put it behind his back and started moving it around, and it was just glitching about, and sometimes Link would just walk on his own, and the way to fix it was to open up your Joy-Con and put a fucking rubber thing or a foam thing in there to get the connector or whatever, or the Wi-Fi, something was being interrupted, the Bluetooth was being interrupted, whatever it was, and that was a launch issue, which my Joy-Cons are still suffering. I still have launch Joy-Cons, and it's not even been 3 years and they are pretty fucked up completely, and they're still playable. I still play games, but it really is annoying. And it's one of those things that I wish had been fixed. But
I think Animal Crossing might be the straw that breaks the camel's back with you, where it's a case of you want to play it handheld, you want it just there in your palm, and all of a sudden you just keep walking into the sea, and it's just oh, for God's sake.
I keep missing bugs because I'm trying to creep up on them slowly, and then I just run.
And goes awry. You are going to get on
rage because that's the rarest fucking scorpion. No, I could have had it for my museum. God damn it. Yeah. Oh, so for me, it's just such a huge bummer, and not even to mention the Pro Controller D-pad, which fucking sucks. Obviously, your mileage will vary in terms of how sensitive you are to this shit, and trust me, I'm fucking sensitive to it, right?
I think it does. You've been unlucky. Mine feels fine, and I do use the D-pad quite a lot. I think.
Well, the thing is, I have the Xenoblade one, which is not really. It's supposed to be a better D-pad, potentially. As some people had speculated, anyway. But Bally, you don't actually use the D-pad that often is the problem.
I do.
You do not. You played fucking all these 2D platformers with an analog stick. You're a heathen.
I rotate.
You're an absolute heathen.
I genuinely do rotate, and I have played a lot of stuff with my D-pad on my Pro Controller, and it feels fine. And I'm not denying what you've
I don't believe it.
I'll prove it to you, but
no,
it
you're just not sensitive
fine.
enough. The thing is, Bally, that your Pro Controller will be fucked up. You just don't have the same sensitivities.
That's not the case at all. I guarantee
it is 100% the case. I guarantee because you can do this test, right, where you press left or right and it will do up or down inputs. It is fucked up. it is so screwed over. And it's not the end of the world, but it happens often enough. And like when I was playing The Messenger, for example, that's a game where you want precision. You can't have things messing you up. And often I would be pressing to the right and it would just like go up or down or whatever, and it would just screw with things and my angles. It was a bad deal. And Celeste is the big one for me. Celeste was, when I tried to play with a D-pad on the Pro Controller on Celeste, I was like, I can't do this. I literally couldn't play it. It felt, because the angles are so important, like the diagonals are so important in that game, and the diagonals just don't read properly. They simply don't. And I think, you know, you can have your personal preferences with D-pads and analog sticks. For me personally, the Pro Controller analog sticks are too high. I don't like them. They should be a bit lower. I'm very, like, there are not many people as finicky as me about control and movement and controllers, but on a personal level, there's just so many problems all across the board.
I
don't make it.
I beat Celeste on the TV, and for half of that game, I played with the D-pad, and it was fine. I promise. You were playing the regular game. You didn't do any of the fucking B-sides, motherfucker. That's not
try,
to say...
Try playing a World 5 C-side with that D-pad and come back to me, and then tell me how you feel about it.
Let's do it.
Okay, yeah, go for it. Anyway, all that to say, I'm disappointed in a lot of aspects. But also, like, it's a system where I put more hours into it than anything else because it is just so easy to play and pick up and nice, and the screen is gorgeous. Like, can we talk about how amazing the screen is on the Switch? It is one of my favorite aspects of the system.
It doesn't feel like a Nintendo screen, and it is still the only handheld screen that you can play, you know, standard home console games. Like, that is still a thing with, you know, obviously other companies not backing the whole handheld thing right now.
Yeah, totally. It's a great boon for the system. It's like why people buy it. And even, you know, when I was playing it on the plane and like I had my headphones in, I had my Pro Controller out just with the screen sitting there on the tray table, playing Astral Chain, and I was like in it, you know? Like I felt like I was playing a console game, but on an airplane. It was pretty amazing. So when those situations happen and everything clicks with the hardware, it's better than most things out there. It's just... I wish that Nintendo had more of an R&D pass on a lot of these aspects, and maybe, you know, as I said, they will go forward and add some of these things, change things. Any other aspects you want to hit? I think still the battery life has always been an issue. We've kind of got around it with, you know, giant battery packs, but
yes,
I wish it was better, you know?
It's one of those things I've gotten used to. You can't obviously get used to a dodgy D-pad or a dodgy Joy-Con in the same way, arguably, but factoring in that battery life and obviously buying the battery packs as we have just feels like it's frustrating. It's not good, but I don't know of other tablets and things with a screen that's as crisp as that, especially that are driving, you know, video games that would be able to last longer. I'm skeptical of that.
Yeah. Obviously there's new hardware they've introduced in the Switch lifecycle. We have Ring Fit Adventure with the Ring-Con, and we have Labo stuff, which is just its own weird entity. So, you know, Nintendo continue to put out peripherals to whatever degree. I feel like it's been less so than previous generations. You know, the Wii was just abounding with peripherals, and I think we've kind of walked back from that somewhat. But I think the peripherals we've got are more interesting. They're wacky in their own way. And from what I've heard, like Ring Fit, like tremendously good. Like as a product, as a working fitness tool, I still want to pick up Ring Fit, and I think that's a benefit to the system. The only problem is, like, if you own a Switch Lite, you can't play Ring Fit Adventure unless you go out and buy Joy-Cons. But hey, that's the way it goes sometimes. So, do you have a grade for hardware, Bally, or should I go first?
You can go first.
Okay, my grade for hardware is a B-. Again, I feel like it's one of those areas where I'm very 50-50 on, because there are so many things that annoy me, but also, like, fundamentally it's still great. So that's why I'm B, but like I think the negatives lean out a bit more than they do for other people, so I go B- on the hardware.
I'm going to go for a B. I agree with you on some of the hardware stuff in terms of like the Joy-Con drift, and obviously I've been luckier with the not analog, the D-pad on the Pro Controller, but it's just that concept of the hardware switching between handheld and home console is too good. It is so good. And before the Switch came out, it was always one of those things that I thought would be pretty cool, but I didn't know how much it would actually impact the way I play games. And it works so fantastically well. So I have to give it a B overall, kind of high points and low points put together.
Yeah, the other thing I will mention is like I don't really play it on the TV ever. Like I barely play my Switch on the TV. And I think the reason for me is because I like to play games while doing other things a lot of the time. And so I like just having my computer on and just sitting here with my Switch in my hand as I play a video or I play a podcast at the same time. And the way that works for me is like it's so easy for me to close it, pause it, put it down, go downstairs if I get called to do a thing. Like it's very flexible in that way. So like a game like Okami that I'm playing at the moment, that's the type of game where in the past, like Twilight Princess or something, you sit down, you're like, okay, I have 3 hours, I need to do this dungeon. Whereas Okami, I'm like, I'll play for 5 minutes. Oh, I need to go do a thing. Okay. Come back later. Oh, I'm about to go to bed, I'll play 10 minutes. And I'm just in the dungeon the whole time. And like, there's no penalty for it. It's like, it's so easy to just hop in and out of games like that. And I play games like that a lot more than you do. I think you're far more like, I will sit down for a session and I will play this session and then I will do something else. Whereas I'm far more fluid with the way I play games and pick things up and put things down. So for me, just handheld wise, it's
I also have like
fantastic.
I've got a big 4K TV in like our new flat in the living room, so it just makes sense for me to want to play it on that, because it just like games look really good on it, including loads of Switch games. So it's just kind of like, that's my preference.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Cool.
Should say I've got a lot of building work going on at the moment. It just kind of started when we started.
That's fine. I haven't heard too much of it. Hopefully it doesn't come through too badly on the recording.
Right.
Let's move on to the first party lineup of Nintendo Switch games. I think it's a pretty strong lineup overall. There are issues I have with it. I think that it is very heavily bolstered by Wii U ports. For God's sake, the best-selling game on the system is a Wii U port. You have games like Smash Brothers, which is pretty much the Wii U version. I know I'll get crucified from some people for saying that, but like, if you talk about the mechanics of it, like, sure, there are a bunch of tiny little changes. It plays slightly differently, but like from a visual standpoint, from a layman's perspective, for someone who doesn't know how to wave dash, right? Like, it's pretty similar to the Wii U version, all things considered. And you got Mario Maker 2, which is like incremental in the most basic way. You got Splatoon 2, which is incremental in the most basic way. The Wii U really was just like the beta Switch in terms of, here are all these amazing ideas and things on the Wii U, and the Switch is like, I'll have that, and I'll take that too, and this also, and like, we'll put them out again, and they'll do better because people like this system now. So for me, there's lots of releases that come out. Like, January is a great example of like, Tokyo Mirage Sessions is out, and I'm like, I played that 4 years ago. Cool. I mean, I'm glad more people get to play it, but like, it doesn't really do anything for me because I played that game already. And Mario Kart is a game that both of us have played, and we still haven't bought the Switch version. There's loads of examples. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which you own on Switch because you really like that game, and I don't know how much you played it on Switch, but Rayman Legends, like loads of games that have come over, and our first party game. Rayman doesn't count in that. You know what I'm saying though. Like, so many first party games are coming over to the system, or the games that we're getting feel incremental. So for me, like, the actual original new Switch games, it's not actually a huge number that like are big bangers. Like, for me, it's Breath of the Wild and Odyssey, which, like, those two alone kind of make it incredible, because they're not since the N64 and Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time have we had such a strong pairing of mainline Mario and mainline Zelda, I think. Sunshine's a fucking mess. I think like Twilight Princess and Galaxy is pretty good. If you say Skyward Sword and Galaxy 2, also a pairing, but it hasn't been this strength of quality since 64 and Ocarina, with Odyssey and Breath of the Wild.
I honestly think Odyssey and Breath of the Wild are both going to be the go-to games in those series that are talked about in 20 years' time. Like I'm confident of that.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, and this is another one for me where it has only been 3 years, but they're already like, Odyssey, Breath of the Wild, Luigi's Mansion. Those are already my 3 favorite games in those franchises that have like come to Switch, and they've managed to like massively outdo their prequels. And so for me, like I rate them really highly in this aspect. And I kind of like, I agree with you about all the first party ports, and I'm sure there's more to come that'll probably be announced in the direct that's coming soon. But I just kind of think they don't bother me too much because...
No, they don't bother me at all. I think it's great they're putting them out there. And honestly, it's not like I feel they are wasting resources or anything, because I doubt many of these studios are putting their time into making ports. Like, they're outsourcing a lot of these things, I imagine, and stuff like that. So it's not like development time is only being put into old games. It's just... I think it's kind of what Nintendo needed in terms of, I don't know if they could have held together with like a good momentum of releases like once a month in 2017 and like 2019 as well, like having these games come out on a consistent basis without that support of, hey, we always have 3D World in the back of our pocket just in case we have a bit of a drought in between things, right? It works to their benefit. Michael Huber on Easy Allies is always like, never going to complain about ports, because there's always going to be people who've not played that game. There's always going to be people who can come to this for the first time and be like, oh, this is a great way for me to experience this. So I'm not going to poo-poo any of them. I just think that from a personal level, and that's what we're grading this on, is a personal level, I often have been like, well, yes, but I've already been here, done this kind of thing,
Yeah, totally. What grade are you thinking?
The main games for me that kind of stick out again is like, it's Breath of the Wild, Odyssey. Fire Emblem is a huge one. Fire Emblem I thought was fantastic. Xenoblade 2 as well. Like, loved Xenoblade 2, an amazing game. And then Luigi's Mansion. Those are probably the 5 that kind of stick out to me the most in terms of the original software. The other stuff we can talk about is like ARMS, right? Like, ARMS came out and didn't really go anywhere. It sold well because it was a launch-ish title. I feel like aside from ARMS and Ring Fit Adventure, which is kind of its own thing, there hasn't been enough experimentation and enough bold new ideas with different IP, and I would kind of like that to happen. It's happening a bit more on the third-party front. I wish the first-party would maybe do a bit more of that, because I think they're kind of coasting on the big boys, and that's perfectly okay. They have a lot of big boys to shoot, but I want a bit more experimentation from the first
new
party
IP would
lineup.
be good. Yeah, what was the last big new IP we had from Nintendo?
I mean, ARMS probably, right?
Yeah.
If we're speaking about like first party, with a budget behind it, and ARMS is one of those games I would like to.
Ring Fit Adventure sold slightly more according to this list, but not much more.
Not a huge amount. They're both kind of in the same ballpark, and I just wish that there was, a bit more flavor to some of this stuff, because I look at a lot of these best-selling games and I'm like, okay, Pokemon's kind of doing the same thing as coasting, Smash is coasting, Mario Kart's coasting, New Super Mario Brothers, Mario Party, Splatoon, it's coasting. Like, there's innovation, and Odyssey and Breath of the Wild are like, look at me, we're fucking innovating, shouting from the fucking rooftops. But the other first-party stuff is like, yeah, not quite.
I think Animal Crossing, which is coming soon, is probably closer to the less iterative side of that, from what we know so far.
I mean, Animal Crossing always has been, but, fair enough. So I think overall it's a really good lineup. Just on a personal level, it's not going to smash it out of the park for me. I'm giving it a B+ overall.
Going for B+, right. I think the highs of Odyssey and Breath of the Wild in particular are just too high for me to give it anything other than an A for me. I just think that those are two incredibly special games to me, and I really hope that there's a handful of other special games like that before the Switch ends. Like, I think Breath of the Wild 2 is going to be huge. I think Metroid Prime 4 has the potential to be something huge. And like I was also saying, Luigi's Mansion 3 was a real pleasant surprise for like a first party game. It's almost become like a bit of a tentpole in a way, where it was definitely far more B tier before. Like 5.3 million units doesn't feel as B tier to me, as perhaps Luigi's Mansion felt beforehand. So I'd have to go with an A. And that's mainly due to Odyssey and Breath of the Wild really just sticking in my mind and being two of the best games of all time in my view.
Fair enough. Let's go to third party then, which has been, I think for me, the biggest surprise of the system. We've done this podcast for a number of years now. Back in 2013, the situation of third parties on both Wii U and 3DS was probably it's the most dire it's ever been. It was a sad, sorry state of affairs where nothing was coming to those systems from companies that weren't Nintendo or the occasional independent developer.
And there were a handful of indie games, but often there was a big delay or there was a big question mark over whether they would even come at all. Whereas now it is very much, if there's a big indie game, it's guaranteed to come to Switch more often than not on launch. And
often you're surprised if it doesn't come to Switch.
Yeah, and there's been a handful that have been delayed on Switch, like Into the Breach was one, but they really are rare, and almost always they come to Switch. Now, you have to pay a premium price for them, don't get me wrong, but you are still getting them coming to Switch, which does feel like a huge step from the Wii U days, where there was loads of indie games coming out and I was like, I really want to play this, and you were playing a ton on like PS4 and PC combined MBZ at the time. And as much as I was missing out on like the Sony exclusives and some of the other games you were playing at that time, it was really kind of the smaller, the cheaper indies that are so beneficial to the podcast, shorter games to talk about that we love playing and talking about, that I was really missing out on, and the Switch has just completely remedied that. And I'm really not going to my PS4 a whole ton to play indie games. I mean, the most recent one I guess was like something like Outer Wilds, and maybe it is quite
right.
That's an example where it is kind of surprising that's not on Switch yet. But then at the same time, that game crashed on me, and like it is quite a demanding game.
Yes, and you look at the type of game that is, right? And
right.
I think this is the ultimate problem with third-party games on Switch, is I look at a game like Outer Wilds, and I look at it and I'm like, I would never play that on Switch, because there are alarm bells going off in my head already, like how it would run, the problems with a lot of the physics systems in it, like it seems like a disaster waiting to happen if it's not optimized well. And the problem is, it's a flip of a coin with this system when it comes to a lot of third-party developers. As great as stuff like Crash and Spyro remakes or Dragon Quest is, for every one of those you also have a Bloodstained, or you have a Wolfenstein Youngblood, or a Mortal Kombat 11, where it's just like, okay, sure, if you don't own another platform, I guess you could play Mortal Kombat on here, but like, would you want to? Not really. It's just ultimately not the best experience, and that is I think that's my biggest issue with third parties on Switch, is there's so much good stuff, but oftentimes you don't know. It is really a flip of a coin whether it's going to be a good port or a bad port.
Right, and that's where I think I have steered away from the games that are, they do take a bit more oomph to run, and that is why games like Wargroove, Celeste, Stardew Valley are like some of my favorite independent games of all time, and they run fantastically well on Switch because obviously they're less demanding. And that's an area where the Switch is so perfect, where those games are coming out on launch. And like Wargroove on Switch was like hugely successful in comparison to the other systems. And like Stardew Valley's passed 10 million recently, and that's in large part due to the Switch probably. And like Celeste obviously sold pretty well. So I think there's a huge number of independent games that are less intensive on the hardware that I think have just done fantastically well on Switch.
Yeah, it's the place to go for them, and it's such an interesting arc, right? You look at this generation and how Sony came out swinging, and a lot of the initial PS4 E3s or events, whatever press conferences they would do, Sony was so going hard on independent developers. They were bringing them out on stage. They were giving them the limelight. They were having the developers come out and talk about their games and say, this thing is coming. It's exclusive to PS4 for this period of time, etc., etc. And over time, as the PS4 gained more momentum and success, and you started to really build that first-party lineup that they had, like, you think about it, like, from 2013 to 2016, really, there wasn't anything to write home about. Sure, there were the people who like Bloodborne, and there are people out there who do. There are the people who liked Knack, if they existed.
So like
some of them
before
did.
Uncharted 4.
Before Uncharted 4, right. Uncharted 4 was like the bellwether of like, okay, here are the big guns coming out now.
That's when you
and
picked
then
up a PS4.
Exactly, that was the thing that got me to buy the system, right? But before that, it was really being carried by a lot of these smaller games. However, as soon as it happened that, you know, Sony was like, oh, God of War, oh, Spider-Man, oh, Ghost of Tsushima, like, these games started coming through and taking the limelight away, and they wanted to focus on that because that's what was giving them the big screen, and everyone was like, oh, these games are amazing, blah, 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 they're winning Game of the Year awards. That is the shift that happened, and around that time is when Nintendo kind of came into the market with Switch and were like, hey, indies, put your game on here. We love indies. And you have Reggie like thanking independent developers at the E3 press conference maybe last year, a couple of years ago, which is amazing. And that happened as a result of Sony moving in a different direction, but also the Switch being this perfect platform for that type of game, and so many of those games being inspired by Nintendo games, right? Metroidvanias are a dime a dozen in the independent scene. Where are people going to play Metroidvanias? A fan base that cares about that type of game, which is on a Nintendo system, right? Like, that is fundamentally where they're drawn towards. Yeah. You got stuff like Harvest Moon, which GameCube, GBA days, Nintendo system, Super Nintendo Harvest Moon. Stardew Valley, where does it do the best? On Switch. Whereas stuff like Co-op, like Overcooked, why does that do well on Switch? Because it's a system fundamentally that people remember growing up playing games, multiplayer or you know, otherwise cooperative, on N64, on Super Nintendo, right? It is the perfect system for the types of games that independent developers make, and the types of games that Nintendo don't make anymore, that are being filled with, you know, these developers. So it's interesting how it's completely turned, and you know now that, like, when an independent game is announced, it's like, okay, it's Switch and PC. Is it even coming to PS4? Like, is there a time window exclusive? Is it coming to Xbox? Who knows? Who cares, really? Yeah. Because, like, most people are going to want to play it on either PC or Switch. That is the go-to independent platforms right now. And that's where developers will sell the most copies. It's where they'll see the most revenue. And it's interesting, because I think the first half of the life cycle, there were lots of stories about, indies are selling crazy on this system. And I had a bit of skepticism of like, well, yes, but it's year one, right? Like, there's not many games on Switch yet. We're waiting to build up a lineup. And it just kept happening. It just kept going. And I think that's the surprise of it, is it didn't stop with that initial boom. The boom has continued to explode, and it doesn't slow down. It just continues to just keep this pace, which is pretty staggering to me.
And I hope that trend can continue with the new systems coming out probably end of this year. Well, we know that this year it will be end of this year, so probably November this year. What will that do to the indie scene? Will any more indies, like, because the Switch is the one with the install base. It's the one that is, you don't need the crazy high tech to run most of these games, and obviously there are the exceptions like in Outer Wilds where it's harder to run on Switch, but you do wonder if there will be more higher end indies happening in the next generation that the Switch won't be able to keep up with. And that maybe not now, but maybe in 2-3 years time, when these new systems get in their stride, it'll be interesting to see if Nintendo can still sort of sit as the indie king.
I wonder because, like, here's a list of games that could run on anything. Cuphead, Ori, Hollow Knight, Celeste, Stardew Valley. Like, those are probably 5 of the biggest games independently on Switch. And if they put out another Stardew Valley in 10 years, is it going to be able to run on the Switch? Probably, because that game could run on like a Super Nintendo, right? Like, there's a timelessness to 2D games that makes it so easy for them to run on anything. So, like, sure, there will be maybe some games that require a bit more power, but
something like Ori and Cuphead that are Microsoft led, and they've got this new system coming out. Do they want to make those games any more, Cuphead
how do you make Cuphead look better?
You can't do
Cuphead.
Like, I agree,
that's what I'm saying. You
Cuphead,
can't, like,
but
Cuphead looks as good as it's ever going to look.
Absolutely. What about Ori, though? They could make that game another level with art style. I'm not saying I know how. I'm just saying...
Sure. I mean, look at the sequel. The sequel to Ori already, with some of the bosses and stuff like that, is starting to lean in the direction where I'm like, okay, maybe they'll have a bit more trouble like running that at 60 frames per second on Switch, for example, right?
Sure.
They could probably put it at 30, but you probably wouldn't want to play it in that case. So yeah, I think Ori probably more so, but like even with Celeste or Hollow Knight, right? Like there's an art style, there's a direction to those games that, yeah, add a bit more particle effects, maybe things like that. You can spruce it up, but fundamentally, those games will always look good. Chrono Trigger always will look good. It still looks good. It doesn't really matter. So yeah, it's an interesting one to bring up, but I think when you think about the best-selling independent games on Switch, most of them
exactly
doesn't matter.
I think we'll have to come back to that question when we see a wave of high-engine indie games, which we haven't really had yet, or not truly successful top-tier ones.
Sure.
And that's kind of where Outer Wilds is a bit of an exception, where it is more independent and it does take a lot of energy to run. So we'll see.
Yeah. But like the other third-party stuff, which we haven't really talked about, I think for me, the biggest surprise of Switch with third parties is how PC-focused a lot of these games are, right? You think about two companies that have supported Switch who have never in their life had a thing to do with Nintendo. Like, I never imagined these companies would work with Nintendo in any capacity. And yet Bethesda and Blizzard are two of the companies that are doing the most legwork on big third-party Switch games. You got Doom and Wolfenstein, obviously. You got that amazing Skyrim port. You have Blizzard putting out Diablo and Overwatch, right? It's those companies, traditionally PC companies, are supporting Switch better than like EA are, right? Which, EA are fucking stupid. Do we want EA games on this system? Probably not. Who gives a shit? They can just fuck off into oblivion with their loot box nonsense. But like, it blows me away that games like Divinity or Baldur's Gate or Civilization, these games are getting releases on Switch and people are like, yeah, this is a system to play them on. And it does speak to some degree the touchscreen capability and the ability to use something that is similar enough to a mouse that maybe would work with some of those games. But in some cases, it's not even using that. It's just using buttons. I don't know why, but there is this real yearning for PC-style games on Switch that just blows my mind. I really don't understand why it's happened or how it's happened. But it's kind of crazy, and it's awesome. I think it's such a cool thing. You have things like them announcing that Divinity Original Sin 2 will have cross-progression, or already has, that game is out already, has cross-progression between the PC Steam version and the Switch version, which means you can play it on your PC and then just cross-progress it through the cloud onto your Switch. That's awesome, and that is the future, and that's what's going to keep happening, I think. But it's such a diverse lineup outside of that. We've got Crash and Spyro collections, and also the Crash racing game, Dragon Quest XI-S, Witcher 3, Alien Isolation, Hellblade, Skyrim, Dark Souls, The Outer Worlds is coming to the system, Turok, an N64 game. They put fucking Turok on the Switch. Like, it is such a wide variety of games from such a wide spectrum of eras. You have Okami HD, which is a game that could run on the PlayStation 3, right? Or Dragon's Dogma. There is no real barrier anymore to like what can be remastered, what can be ported to the system, and as a result, companies like Bethesda are like, yeah, we'll put fucking Doom 64 on there. Why not? It's in absence of the Virtual Console, in absence of Nintendo having a rigid, classic games label. You've been able to see companies like Capcom go out there with Mega Man Legacy Collection or Konami with the Castlevania Collection, right? They put out their old games in a different format and they sell way better than they would have otherwise. And yeah, it just opens up windows. And I think the only company lagging behind on that is Nintendo themselves, right? Like, where is a Mario Sunshine GameCube thing that we can just download or,
Yeah. I mean, it's almost
like
like they're too busy getting those Wii U ports out to do anything further back, which I appreciate, but like, it still feels weird. There's no way to play GameCube games without a GameCube or a Wii.
Yeah. Pretty much. It's a weird situation they're in, but they, they've got a lot of things to do, a lot of things to deal with. So I think for me, third party is killing it on Switch. I had written down A-. I think I'm actually just going to go an A. I'm going to go an A because this is, and I think this is comparing it to what Nintendo had before, right? Like on a wider spectrum, this system still doesn't get the biggest games of the year. It doesn't get your Divisions. It doesn't get your Far Cries. It doesn't get your FIFAs or your Call of Duties, your Jedi Fallen Orders, right? The games that, really realistically are not going to run great on the system, so let's not bother. Obviously, there are exceptions to that rule. Doom Eternal is coming to Switch. I wouldn't want to play Doom Eternal on Switch, but it's coming. There is a version of it. Witcher 3 runs on Switch, as far as you can say anything runs on Switch. So, yes, obviously, it's not the perfect system, but no system's the perfect system. So, I'm going to go with an A. And we haven't even mentioned third-party exclusives, which, Octopath for a little while was an exclusive. Mario plus Rabbids, Astral Chain, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, and we've also got No More Heroes and Bayonetta coming up. A couple of indies that are still exclusive, Golf Story and The Tourist. There's some really good third-party things they're doing exclusive-wise. I wish they'd do a bit more with it. We kind of have this pace of one a year at the moment. We had like Mario and Rabbids in launch year, then we had Octopath, which was more of a timed exclusive, and then we had Astral Chain and Marvel last year. And it seems like we're probably going to get No More Heroes and Bayonetta 3 this year. But I'd like to continue that trend, or even up that trend a bit more, to get even more third-party exclusives locked down. Because I'll tell you what, as far as polish goes, Astral Chain is one of the most polished things I've seen on Switch, and you don't get that from third-party publishers unless it's an exclusive where they're developing primarily for that particular hardware. So, yeah, I'm giving it an A. Where are you sitting at, Bally?
I'm going to go A as well. And, the Wii U, I think actually had some really strong first-party games, like Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, Mario Maker, 3D World was great. It had a lot of strong games. So, but what it just didn't have was all those things to play in between. And that's part of the reason that on this podcast, I played a ton of Nintendo classic games because that Wii U Virtual Console was really good and had a ton of stuff to play, but it didn't have all the indies that I wanted to play. I've actually, at this point in time, I've played considerably more Switch games than MBZ, and that's just because of all those games he plays on PC or he's played before in other systems. They've all come to Switch, and I've played them, and that's been fantastic. So, I've played something like over a quarter of all the games I have on my backloggery. I've done that a few times. Over a quarter of them are Switch games, and that's just insane considering it's only been here for less than 3 years. So I absolutely love games like Stardew Valley, Celeste, Wargroove. These are games that I could have been waiting a long time to see come to the Wii U, or I'd have to pick up on PS4, but they just come to Switch. They're the place I want to play them. There's been a handful of things I've had to pick up on PS4, but it's not as much fun playing indie games and third-party games on PS4, honestly. It is that handheld aspect that you want with a slightly shorter game that you just want to dip in and dip out of, that I think does work really well with games like Stardew Valley, like Wargroove, it just has been a joy so far. And there's so many indie games like Eastward, Sports Story coming out this year. Well, hopefully both of them come this year. And then definitely Switch is the place I'd want to play those games. I mean, I think are they both exclusives? I know Sports Story is, but
Eastward is coming out on PC as well. I think Sports Story is exclusive because Golf Story, for whatever reason, is still only available on Switch.
Right? Yeah. So I think they're just absolutely nailing it, and I'd even be tempted to go up to an A+, honestly. So I'll probably stick with an A because there's even more room.
If you're comparing it to what it used to be, I would believe that, but it's
right.
It's
I'll
pretty
stick
crazy.
with an A for now, but I'm one happy camper when it comes to third party games.
Totally. Marketing and messaging. So how have Nintendo got the word out about Switch? What is their advertising been like, and how have they been kind of positioning it in the market?
Wait, for us in the UK?
I don't know. I think just generally, what the types of advertising they're doing. For me, it's this very clear delineation, right? One of the most famous adverts for the Wii U that I remember, that I actually kind of like quite a lot, was this. It was like a 5-minute long thing that was kind of like a mini story almost, where there's this young kid and he plays with his older brother, and like there's like this girl who comes around who's older, and like the, you know, friends or whatever, and he's like the young kid, and he's playing with them in Smash Brothers, and he keeps losing, and like he's clearly like interested in the older girl who comes around, and you know, they try and play on that a little bit. Then he like goes away and he trains with his amiibo, and his Mario becomes super powerful, and then he like impresses her at the end by his Mario amiibo beating them. It's a very goofy.
The best way to get girls.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, you're just train. Hey kids, train those amiibo to level 50. You'll just be fucking swimming in it. But basically, that like epitomized the problem with Wii U, is they just didn't know what the fuck to do with advertising. Like, who is that appealing to? I don't understand. Like Smash Brothers fans, kids, I don't know. It was so weird. It's such a strange type of advertising, and I think the thing they've done distinctively with Switch is focus on young adults and selling Switch as a lifestyle brand more than anything else, right? Like, it is a thing you carry with you. It is a cool looking product. It is a thing you'll take out your backpack and play with other people as you're hanging out outside or on a rooftop or whatever. It is such a clear and obvious, we want this to look like a cool product without being edgy about it, without being overly like, oh, we're cool, and doing it in a way that kind of threads that needle.
I think the rooftop was one step too many, but I really liked the initial, here's a guy playing Breath of the Wild and he needs to take his dog out for a walk. I think that's a lot more relatable than rooftop parties, personally.
Sure, no, totally.
But the general message is really strong. And like, we both recently listened to Reggie's, he was interviewed by Cornell University and like their business school. And one point he was saying is everyone he had spoken to who'd played the Wii U, they said, Reggie, we love that you can like play away from the screen, but then you have to stay near your TV. Like, and this was essentially one of the original ideas why the Switch is the way it is. It's like an evolution of that idea, the Wii U, playing away from your TV, but still being able to play on your TV.
As we said, like in every aspect, the Wii U is the beta version of the Switch, right?
Exactly.
Like software-wise, hardware-wise, everything. It just...
Totally.
It really
and
was.
I just think that fundamental concept fits into so many different lifestyles of different people who play video games, whether you are dog walking, whether you are looking after kids, whether you don't have kids and you just want to play some games on your TV, or you want to play them when you go on holiday or you're traveling, or you know, the sleep function with just like dipping in and out of games versus, you know, sitting with a JRPG for 6 hours in a row. Like it offers all those things all in one, and it's that versatility that I think video games are generally going in the direction of versatility. Like if you look at like what Game Pass is doing and that ability to dip in and out of games, like people aren't having the same amount of time to sit down and play video games for 5-6 hours at a time. And I think as we move to the next generation, there is the companies who articulate their message to apply to people who can play for 20 minutes to half an hour at a time, I think are going to come out successful. And I think Nintendo and the Switch are already on that message hype train. Like it is rolling and it's doing well and people understand that message. And yes, the Switch Lite is similar message, but without obviously docking to a station essentially. But you know, Switch Pro is probably going to be announced later this year, probably come out the year after, and it's going to reinforce that message that you can play this on the TV or on the go, and it's going to be popular. And yeah, I think it's the message has worked because the hardware is partially so strong. It's a much easier sell, I think, even than the Wii, honestly. In some ways, it's like that the Wii is trying to apply to people who don't play games, where the Switch is trying to appeal to people who obviously do play games. And once you already are appealing to people who are playing games, the concept is straightforward. I agree that it might be a bit confusing for people who don't play video games, but in many ways, that's not in the market in the same way the Wii was, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like the types of people who are buying Switch are the types of people who already own a PlayStation or an Xbox. You know,
Absolutely.
They are people who are built into an ecosystem and want something more. They want an extra bonus on the side.
That was another interesting point in that Reggie interview, is when he joined Nintendo in 2003, like the average number of people who owned the video game system was like 1 in 4 or something, and now that number has increased to where the average number is almost multiple video game systems. And people, as you say, do own like a PlayStation with a Switch like I do, or they have a gaming PC, or they've got like an Xbox. Like there's this huge combination that I think the Switch is just such a fantastic complement to any gaming setup.
It is 100%, yeah. And to some degree, like when we talk about marketing and messaging, some of that stuff just gets done for Nintendo. Like they don't even have to try. I think of celebrities tweeting out about Switch. There was a photo of like a sports team on a plane, all of them with Switches. I can't remember if that was a thing that like Nintendo had sent to them or something, but some of that stuff they do is really smart in terms of them speaking to this really wide audience, like a basketball team or a baseball team or whatever, and they're like, look at all of us on the plane playing Switch. But then you also have like the natural stuff, which is like Chrissy Teigen on Twitter being like, hey, how do I kill this thing in Luigi's Mansion? Or like Brie Larson tweeted out today or yesterday, she quote tweeted the Animal Crossing Switch that they just announced and being like, oh my god. And like, I wonder to what degree Nintendo would want to go after those opportunities with celebrities, and to what degree they work because they're more natural, right? Like people being more online and social media.
I mean, we've had the whole Beyonce with the DS and all, like it. We've had the celebrity forced down our throats, and now we're having the, you know, subtle celebrity, which I agree. I think it works a lot better. It's a lot more natural, and whether it
might not have like the wider reach, but like it feels like the more.
It feels less orchestrated, even if it is.
Yeah, it's the type of thing that will sell a product more naturally because, you know, if someone legitimately likes something, like Brie Larson replied to Doug Bowser or for something last year, and I thought was very funny. You know, these people who have influence and reach, and them talking about their love for video games and how much they care about it. You know, not that there's as much stigma as there used to be, but I think it just continues to widen the approach to games generally from a wider audience and people accepting it even more so. And so I think Switch has done a great job of doing that as just being the system to get a wider audience who may not have thought about, you know, playing games before. So
totally.
So yeah, it's an interesting one. I would probably overall go a B+. I would say that, I guess, especially in the UK, just advertising-wise, it's not that really I watch much TV, so I guess I just haven't seen any of that stuff because I don't really watch television. They do, you know, some good stuff on YouTube in terms of their marketing and advertising, which, you know, as I said, they kind of keep that focus. It's on young people. It's not appealing to a kids audience necessarily. Like there are some things that go in that direction, but they tend to stay in that general lane, and I think it's worked for them overall pretty well. So
yeah. I mean I've put down an A. I think that it's kind of cheating because I think it's just the proof of concept is almost the best marketing for this thing possible, and I agree, like the marketing in the UK is not that big, and that's because we're not a big market for Nintendo and never really have been. I guess we might have been a little bit more during the Wii era, but, you know, it's not a big deal.
Look, whenever a popular Nintendo console that has a racing game on it, like Mario Kart, that's going to sell in the UK regardless because people here are obsessed with racing things and cars, so, you know.
Racing things, FIFA, British things, Brexit, that's one thing people are keen on. But yeah, it's like... I just think the messaging is so strong with this, and it is interesting that the Wii U, which was a similar concept, was such a flop and not marketed in a way. It was like marketed as like this alternative next step to the Wii, an expansion to the Wii almost, and then, you know, change the color, make it like more remote with that added handheld ability, and it's just like done so well. So I'm gonna go with an A.
Cool. And then the last one we have is services. And I kind of said this encompassed the online, the Super Nintendo NES stuff, and like offers and things like that, bonus games, the vouchers. I think this is the one that they're not good at, and they still are not good at it, and they have continued to not be good at it for near 2 decades now. So, yeah, you know, like it's kind of like the people who want Pokemon to be Breath of the Wild. It's like, look, we love these things, but we got to hold them to a specific expectation or set of expectations, and the set of expectations when it comes to Nintendo and online services is just it's rock bottom. I'll say like it's probably improved generally. We played Smash Brothers last night, and it was pretty good overall. I
Yeah.
thought, it wasn't terrible. It worked
That's like a
well
few
enough.
a day or two after Byleth came out, and it ran smoothly. So you'd think that a lot of people were playing online at the time to play with Byleth. So
Yeah,
I mean, it might be my new internet, to be honest, but who knows?
maybe. Yeah, that could have some effect on it potentially, but it's always going to feel better in person. Every time we play Smash Brothers in person, I'm like, this is like a revelation compared to playing online, and you don't really notice it. But
I mean, Squad Strike is just the most wonderful mode as well. That
it's the best
they
mode,
need
yeah.
to have online.
But then you also have Mario Maker, which is still a fucking garbage dump, just burning, and like you can smell it fucking 6 miles away. It's that bad. It's just like literally when a PowerPoint fucking presentation has better frame rate than a video game, you're in trouble. And that's the case for Pokemon as well. Like you turn on the Wi-Fi in the wild area, and it's like, okay, let's do 2 frames a second for a little bit here. That's good. It's weird because it's like it's across every single developer. It's not like Game Freak are their own thing. They probably have their own infrastructure set up for like how their internet stuff works, but maybe it is just a fundamental Switch thing. The Wi-Fi chip in the Switch is just bad. Like it doesn't have good reach to it. It doesn't work into the same distance that it should do with other consoles. I remember when I first got the Switch and I took it upstairs in my home in Edinburgh, and it just couldn't get the connection, whereas the Wii U was sitting there and the Wii U was perfectly fine. Wii U had a great Wi-Fi chip. It would work wherever. Versus the Switch, and I was like struggling to even get 1 bar. Actually, in a place where I played my DS Lite and had perfect signal, I struggled to get 1 bar on my Switch, which was incredibly disappointing. And I think it just speaks again to potentially rush with the hardware, getting it out on a shorter timeline than they would have initially liked to, because Wii U was flogging so horribly. And so, you have things like the Joy-Con drift and the Wi-Fi chip being bad, and then also having issues with connectivity with the Joy-Con and its Bluetooth emitter. It's just kind of all adds up as a result of a rushed product that has probably been improved. I would imagine the Switch Lite probably has a bit of a better Wi-Fi chip in there, but I don't know. That kind of just builds into the online service, making it worse than it already is. So there are games that do pretty well. I would say Splatoon is a great example of a game that has pretty good.
It's pretty smooth most of the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a different type of game again, but that works perfectly fine. There are games that work really well, like Nidhogg, which we played online, which just, like, I don't know, it just works. The only problem with those types of games is when you're jumping into an online game on Switch, unless it has crossplay, it's really rare that you'll be able to find people to play with. You just, especially a game like Nidhogg, which is on its own an independent game, a smaller game that not many people will have bought. Just jumping in at any time to play somebody, you're not going to find anyone. It's just not going to happen because there aren't enough people out there to play those types of games. I think it's one of the negatives of being a multiplayer game on Switch if you're smaller is something like Morphe's Law. Remember that game that got, was part of Directs and stuff?
Yeah, and they needed loads of people to be playing that online to work. And
yeah.
That was never going to happen, like
yeah.
1 in a million.
Right, because there's so many other games competing for your attention in terms of multiplayer. Not only with Nintendo, with Splatoon and Smash Brothers, and even Mario Kart, right? Like those are the 3 kind of big multiplayer games that you're going to have. You also have Fortnite on Switch. You now have Overwatch on Switch. You have free-to-play games like Dauntless and Paladins and Rocket League. And I think the reason why stuff like Fortnite, Rocket League, Dauntless, why they all still work is all of those games are cross-play. They're all free-to-play. Well, Rocket League isn't free-to-play, but like they're all cross-play, which means that there will always be people playing them. It's not just within the Switch ecosystem, which is one of those reasons why I'm actually a little skeptical about Overwatch, and even if I do pick it up at some point in the future on Switch, I will remain skeptical about whether I even want to play it because the numbers won't probably add up, right? You want a really large user base, and Overwatch does not have crossplay. It hasn't, and I don't think it will until the sequel comes out. So for me, that's a bit of a bummer, right? That kind of leans into the problem with online is, the the size of the ecosystem on Switch and how many people you can find games to even play against. And hopefully the crossplay future is just going to continue to happen, and we won't have to worry about this anymore, because there'll always be Xbox or PlayStation or PC people who will jump in, and you'll have a much wider community, a much wider pool to pull from. I don't think I ever played a Rocket League game and found a Switch player. It's always PC or PlayStation or whatever, because there's just not as many people on this platform versus the others, or at least dedicated people playing it, right? So
Totally.
Then we also have like NES, Super Nintendo games, which, sure, like there's some good stuff on there. I played what was it? The Caveman game, Joe and Mac, on Super Nintendo. That was great. I had a great time playing that, and I think for me it really signaled how important the rewind feature is and how big a deal that is in this day and age. And we've gone through various iterations of Virtual Console and Nintendo. We didn't have any save states, then Wii U built in the save state feature, which was really nice, and now we have save states and rewind, so we have like the most accessible versions of these games there has ever been. Nintendo also put out these like special edition versions where let's play the original Legend of Zelda, but you start out with all the items, so you don't have to go and find them, and it makes it much easier for you. I like that idea, and I think that them stepping back and not putting games out on a frequent a basis anymore is potentially good news, because it means that like when they do big dumps, they can make lots of stuff happen at once, and it's more of a push. It's more of a coordinated, okay, a big thing happened, here's a direct, here's the new games, everyone go play them type of deal, as opposed to, oh, it's Ninja Gaiden and I don't know, Peggle or something. Peggle's not on an old game, that's an Xbox game. You know what I mean, it's fucking Tetris, who knows?
Tetris. Yes.
Yeah, and most people are going to be like, oh, whatever, and just not even... Well, like Vice Project Doom, which is like a weird, like, deep cut game that no one's heard of, and it's never come out on a virtual console before. And that gives me hope in terms of, I thought that with this setup, you weren't going to get those super fucking weird deep cuts. But it turns out Nintendo are kind of doing that, because most part, all the big NES and Super Nintendo games are on there already, right? They just put them out day one. Like, you talk about the triumvirate, Mario World, Super Metroid, Link to the Past, they're all there already. Like, you can't release them again. So everything they're released from here on, they have the ability to go a bit deeper into the library.
Are we past the point where we're kind of judgmental of Nintendo for the fact that there isn't like that fully fledged virtual console that there was on the Wii U? Like, I remember when the system first came out, we were very critical, and I've personally become a lot more kind of roll with it kind of feeling towards it, just because there has been such a huge number of third-party games especially that have just taken up all of our time, to be honest. And like, sure, I want that GameCube virtual console, but like, at what cost? Like, is that eventually going to come? What do you think?
In the Wii U era, I feel like we would have been even more critical, because there wasn't nothing else. There was nothing else. And so you needed at least some of the back catalogue to bolster you. As it is, I think I've checked my hour count, and I've put 4 hours in on the Super Nintendo one and like an hour maybe on the NES one. Like, I've barely put time into digging it. And there's like 25, 40 games for the NES, maybe like 25 games for the Super Nintendo, and there's stuff on there that I want to play. I'd like to dig into some Breath of Fire. I would like to play Demon's Crest a bit more. I started Demon's Crest. I want to get to some of those deeper cuts and play some of those and check them out, but like, there's so many fucking games on this platform that really it doesn't matter that much to me, and it may matter more when the types of games I want to play come more to the forefront, right? Like, if there's a GameCube virtual console, I'm going to be in there straight away playing something. But that's not the case right now. And judging by third-party companies, the way things have rolled out, as we've mentioned so many times, Mega Man Legacy Collection is just better for Capcom. The Castlevania Collection is just better for Konami. Okami HD is just better. Like, all these re-releases and versions and collections, they are fundamentally better marketing opportunities, better value for the consumer, and ultimately more profitable for the company that are putting them out, versus, hey, Mega Man X6 is out on the virtual console today. Like, that drops, and who cares? Like, the people who care about Mega Man X6, which is like a tiny amount of people. And sure, you get like 1,000 sales, versus Mega Man X Legacy Collection comes out, and you're like, oh, there's 4 games on that. I'm interested in all the Mega Man X games. I'll pick this up, it's a good value. And then you're like, off to the races with 500,000 people picking it up versus a much smaller percentage. It makes more sense this way. And as much as like people will complain, I think Nintendo have realized like, third parties are doing better on the system by approaching it in a different way. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And then we have like the vouchers, which I just have to bring up because it's just a fucking joke. In the UK especially, like the retail market here is very different to the way it works in the US in terms of, for the most part, games will be $60 at retail everywhere versus on the eShop where it will also be $60. Here, you go to the eShop and it's like, Breath of the Wild is £60. And I'm like, no, Amazon has it for 40. That's a third of the price off. It is insane. Like the vast gap between prices on the eShop versus what you can get online, and especially places like Shop 2 or the Game Collection or Base, like all these UK online retailers that nowadays are doing digital versions of those games. Like the last 4 first-party Nintendo games I've bought have all been digital because I found them for the same price as hard copy retail for like 40 quid.
Yeah.
And there's no reason for me to not do that, right? I would be stupid to go on the eShop and pay 50 quid for Animal Crossing when I could get the exact same thing digitally, a code delivered to me the day before it comes out, preload it for £10 cheaper. And the vouchers are like, well, what if you saved 15 quid overall? And I'm like, no, I can save 20 quid if I just go to these retailers. Like, it costs me less to not do your deal, your oh so great deal. So fundamentally, I like the vouchers as an idea, but they are not localized well enough, right? Like, for the markets that they're being put in, they don't think about the conditions of the UK market versus the US market and the value proposition that someone could potentially get from these. They're not worth it. It's not an offer. And we joke often, but the Nintendo don't know what sales are, and like the best you can hope for is 30% off. But it's true. They just don't. They don't understand what a good deal is. So, for me overall, looking at the totality of the services aspect, it's a C. Like, it's just a C, and it's not. It's no better than that because it's a mess all over the place. They still insist that the app is something you should use, and I can't deal with it anymore. It's not it's not there. It's not where it should be, and it doesn't deserve to get anything higher than a C from me.
Yeah, I agree with most of that. It's just, in the grand scheme of things, like a lot of these issues are on the smaller side in my head at least. And yeah, I've completely done a bit of a U-turn on the whole virtual console thing. Like it's not much of a big deal for me. And yeah, I've spent even less time in that NES and SNES player thing service, and it's fine. It's fine. It is what it is. And the online functionality is still pretty bad. And the services also, I guess, includes like the layout of like the menus and the lack of themes and
sure. I mean, you can roll that in,
and that stuff is pretty poor as well. Like initially, it was nice to have like such a clean, crisp looking.
It's still snappy.
Layout.
Like
it's
I like
snappy.
how fast it is, but like yesterday, I gave you this code for the Ghost of Tsushima theme on PS4, and you're like, oh man,
this is
great.
Themes.
Yeah, forgot about themes.
Every time I go back to my 3DS, I'm like, this looks amazing. Like these themes, and the music comes in, and this is nice.
The folders, oh dear lord,
folders.
Can we? We're going to talk about a 3DS soon on this show, and we'll mention that at the end. But there's never been a system that has better like functionality in terms of tracking what you've played, like organizing your stuff. Like the 3DS is like my dream console in terms of that shit.
It's like god tier for that kind of stuff.
It is god tier, for sure.
And the fact that the Switch has so little of it. Now you can order your games in terms of how much you've played them, but still not see the hour count. And it's like
the exact hour count.
The
it's
exact
like
hour
between
count.
this and that.
Yeah, it's truly, truly bizarre and frustrating. But as I said, in the grand scheme of things, it's a very small issue, but it can't get any higher than a C. It's not great. It's typically very, very average. Maybe even slide to a C minus, honestly. Like it's just, it's not great.
Yeah. So I think that pretty much covers it. It's been a hell of a 3 years, and I think that, overall, Switch is a great system. There are issues here and there. We can complain and stuff like that, but I think it's exceeded so many people's expectations, and especially you think about our mood at 6 a.m. coming off that January presentation for the Switch and like setting up the future of Nintendo. I think we were pretty fucking negative, you know? We were pretty down in the dumps about what the system was going to be. And for Nintendo to have just turned it around completely and just made it like this console that appeals to such a wider audience and is just so...
And I mean, that presentation, they were really still throwing everything at the wall. It was very much an emphasis on ARMS and 1-2 Switch in both those games.
Yeah, you can...
I mean, they both sold decently, but like nowhere near the levels of, Odyssey, Breath of the Wild.
You can really feel them just like tightrope walking and not wanting to please as many audiences as possible and being like, well, let's put ARMS out there and see if this motion control thing...
Well, they wanted to take that risk, and see if that was a market that could stick, but they had like this system that appeals to multiple markets with different games and software, and then what sticks, what shall we invest more in, and then obviously those games haven't done as well, and as a result you don't get, I say all this and then Ring Fit Adventure comes out,
right,
but my point is that's still very much B, C tier level of what they're aiming the system at in comparison to
right, like the marketing for Ring Fit Adventure has not been like the big boom push of Wii Fit in the same way, but also like
no,
I think they are fine with that. Like they're fine with putting out a product that will naturally through word of mouth maybe even reach those levels at some point in time. I think it's better for them to just have experimental stuff and test the waters. But
and honestly, like last year, Ring Fit Adventure was the game maybe talked about most in Game of the Year discussions from a Nintendo side, along with like Luigi's Mansion, and then the industry doesn't talk enough about Fire Emblem anyway.
No.
And on top of that, like Link's Awakening, it was up there with those three games, and you wouldn't have expected that when that game was announced.
No, you would not have done, for certain. So yeah, do you have like an overall grade for Switch after 3 years?
Yeah, at this point in time, I think it's got to be an A. I honestly just think that the first party games are some of my favorite of those franchises ever. And on top of that, just the sheer number of games that have come to the system, both new and old, because I've always had things I want to play on the Switch. All kinds of genres, everything is coming to the system, and that has just been so great. It's like completely revolutionized how I play games with the whole aspect of handheld on the go and in front of your TV like that. I can play all these games so easily, and it's been a fantastic like almost 3 years at this stage. So I'd go for an A, and I think it's got room to go to like even higher if games like Breath of the Wild 2, Metroid Prime 4, we'll see what Animal Crossing is like. I think there will probably be more Mario Kart. I think there's more exciting tentpole releases, and I think there's a lot of B tier stuff like a Luigi's Mansion was that will pleasantly surprise us all and actually sell in the range of 6 to 10 million units, and I think will do very well critically as well.
Yeah. I am going to give it a B+ overall. I think I probably have more issues with it overall than you do, but it's still unquestionably a real success for Nintendo, and I like it a whole lot. It's very good. It's the Switch. It's everyone's favorite. So, hey,
it's a lot to happen in such a short space of time.
I think so. Yeah,
I think it does feel like it's been longer, but it really hasn't, and that is a weird feeling.
Totally. So, yeah, I think that pretty much wraps us up for the show. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We did a good job running through all those things, and let's see where we are in 3 more years' time, eh? Will there be another Switch by that point? Will they have moved on to a Pro model? How do they line up in the industry with the PS5 and Series X coming out? Lots of interesting things on the horizon. This year especially is going to be an interesting one to follow. So let's get on out of here and talk about some various things about the show and stuff like that. Reminder that yes, if you are having trouble with the feed, the RSS feed, which we don't know at this point when this episode goes up whether it will be fixed or not, you can access episodes on YouTube. If you go to youtube.com/thisnintendolife, we have a playlist there. It's got every episode going back to the beginning when the show had a different name even, so you can find all the stuff there, easily accessible. Hopefully this will be resolved, because it is giving me great anxiety, and I just want it to be sorted and over. So hopefully it will be. You obviously can find us in various places around the internet, and we have an email address that you can send emails to. We're planning to do a 3DS retrospective. The 3DS, dead and buried now. The last 3DS game came out in 2019, which was pretty much Persona Q2. We are over and done with it. It is in the ground, and I think it is a great console that spanned most of the life of this podcast, and it's an interesting one to talk about. So we're going to do a big old retrospective on the 3DS. We don't know when it's going to happen, probably at one point in February. We're waiting for Nintendo Direct announcements. They're probably imminent at some point, but depending on when and...
I think it's going to be one Thursday this month, and we just don't know which Thursday.
Exactly. So we're kind of biding our time, because if a Nintendo Direct happens, obviously we're going to talk about that versus 3DS retrospective, but we will be doing one of those, so please, we'd love for you to send in your memories of the 3DS. What is it that you'll take away from the system? What is it that impacted you about the system? What are your favorite games on it? All that type of stuff. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the 3DS. Send them to our email address, which Bally will tell you right now.
Please send them to thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. Send us your thoughts, your comments. We want to hear them.
Absolutely. You can find the show in lots of places. We're all over the internet. iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn. Maybe we're on Google Podcasts now that we switched hosts. I haven't checked, but that could be a thing. Maybe a benefit of doing that. Yeah, you can find us on Twitter to get all updates on things like what is happening with the podcast feed. Follow us at TNL Podcast. That is at TNL Podcast. You can find me on Twitter spouting my various nonsense at LordNBZ. Where can they find you, Bally?
I'm on Twitter at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91. Been doing a bit more recently. Been cooking some things, tweeting some pictures. Really getting into the cooking. Loving it.
Good stuff. Yeah, that's pretty much it, I think. Obviously, we got our patrons to thank for supporting the show and helping us through these trying times. You can go to patreon.com/thisnintendolife to support us and get bonus episodes. And we'd like to thank some of our patrons, Bally.
Thank you to our two $10 tier patrons. They are my fiancée Caroline and Atari Alex. Thank you for your support. I'm still going to say that my fiancée is Atari Alex at some point. That's going to happen. But I'd also like to thank our other... we've got 20 patrons. We'd like to thank all of you so much for your support and the kindness of your heart to support our show and keep us on the road. It's hugely appreciated.
Absolutely. And you can get a bunch of bonus episodes over there. We are probably going to be doing our top 5 3DS games to coincide with a 3DS retrospective for our Patreon show for the month of February. So if that sounds good to you, then head on over there. Pretty much wraps us up, I think. Thanks, Bally, for hanging out with me and talking about these video game things. It's been fun. We'll be back.
No worries.
Very soon, in a couple of weeks' time. Maybe sooner than that. Who knows? If a Nintendo Direct gets announced out of nowhere and it's like way before we record the next episode, we might have to do an emergency episode. So we'll see. Until then, though, thank you very much for listening, and see you next time. Bye bye. The musical interlude used on today's show was Long Journey Home from Kentucky Route Zero, copyright Cardboard Computer 2020.